Hey Tiff,
Hello.
how are you
Um,
doing?
all right. Good, good now that I don't know, slept more as of late. Sleeping is always good.
You weren't getting much sleeping? What's going on? Just holiday times, busy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I also I guess sort of last minute decided to just graduate. So then yeah,
What do you
now I'm
mean?
done with that.
What's that mean?
Well, I had enough credits, so I was just like, should I should I graduate? And then I kind of all did all my decision making in December. So then just getting, I don't know, paperwork and stuff in.
Yeah. So tell me, why was it a question whether you should graduate? Why were you like, oh, should I? Like, what was that about?
Uh I feel like when I entered school, I was like, oh, my last year, it will be like do my thesis project. It will be like the culmination of like my existence as like a being with worth.
I, no, I,
And
I, I get it.
so I was like, should I do that? Or like finish like the thesis course, even like because I was looking forward to it, but I wasn't really feeling it. And I think that I just attached so much meaning to it that it was hard to let go of. And then one course that I like really wanted to take, the prof is on sabbatical, and it was more that I really wanted to work with her. And
Yeah.
then my other course, I ended up just like talking to um the prof, and I'm gonna just audit the course instead, so I'm still in it, and that way I don't have to pay for it. um
Yeah. Do you think was there anything about that where it was like kind of an realizing that it was like an existential decision, as arbitrary as you sound about it? I was wondering if I should, and then it's like, okay, now what?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then also like getting everything like lined up so I know the answer to now what before I like feel like I'm doing something drastic, even though it's not that drastic.
Well,
um
it's a big deal. Congratulations.
thank
L-
you.
like don't, avoid what I usually do, which is to kind of blow it off as not something to. I'm not saying like go out and like, unless you want to like pop bottles, but just like that's a huge deal.
Oh,
It's a
it
huge
it
deal.
hasn't settled in yet. It
And
still
and
feels like
it might not for a while. It might. I don't want to. I'm not trying to talk about myself, but it did happen. Like when I sold my company, which was like a year ago, it was like months later that my wife was like, you never celebrated that, and she didn't mean, like, because I'm not the kind to go pop bottles. Plus, it was still kind of like COVIDy out, but it was like at least stop and recognize it and hold it
mm,
close, and don't. You're not the kind to. I can tell. I mean, we've never actually met, but we've talked enough, and the way you're talking about it to be like, um, yeah, I graduated, bitches. Like, look at me, but more like, but you go the opposite, and so finding that middle ground where you're kind of like, yeah, I mean, that's an accomplishment. That's a big deal.
I will I will try to do that. So thank
Now
you.
Dre's like, what happened? And he's like, did she make a nice split pea soup or Tiff graduated?
Oh, congratulations, Tiff.
Thank you.
Nice.
I'm not trying to embarrass you, Tiff. I'm just trying to
Now
say,
that,
like, you know, like let people say amazing.
yeah, yeah, yes. Celebrate your victories. Force everyone you know to celebrate your victories as well. Let them know that it's a big deal. Good. So, okay, well, welcome to the beginning of the rest of it all. You know what you could celebrate your newfound victory with?
What?
A sweet t-shirt. Look at this.
Oh wow! Oh
Oh,
man, Dre, you got to put that up on the chill and share. I'll totally get one right now.
Yeah, yeah. I'll say it's in my Etsy shop. It's ready to go.
nice.
Yeah, I should have your Etsy shop bookmark, shouldn't I? And it should have it in like an RSS feed because something's always new popping up. How do I find it? Etsy.
NFTs.boutique. NFTEES.boutique.
NFT. Sorry, NFT.
NFTEES, like NFTs, like t-shirt.
Oh, yes.
Dot boutique.
Dot boutique. Wait, oh, that's a URL. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's not a
it's
search on
URL.
Etsy.
No, that is a URL because I'm fancy that way. .coms. Bah. Basha.
If you try and register a company with that URL in India, they don't let you register it. They don't recognize that as a valid domain TLD. So I've had a lot of trouble with having a non-standard non.com.in, and it's hell. You just can't operate. So I accepted nothing.
There was I was having issues with it in LinkedIn because I have Dre at tbd.company because my company is tbd.company, and it just doesn't. It's just like it just throws it up right back at me. All right.
Let me try to find what size had it. Look at this. I got it. I'm looking at my previous purchases. Bunch of Dunkin' Donut font styles for that one thing.
Yeah. So the I'll pop a link in the chat so you can take it. You can just click directly to the
What did I get for the
to the
Imagine
t-shirt.
one? The Imagine one I got.
Yeah. Okay. So the Imagine one is a different. So this is I'm trying a different. This is like a Denver haze. Like it's a bit of a thicker material, and it's a little slimmer than I think the last round, or whatever the Imagine shirt was. The Imagine shirt was a thinner material, but I have an alternate version of this logo that's a little bit more distressed and muted. So I'm going to create the distressed and muted version of the t-shirt with the thinner material, which is a Gildan something or another. And then yesterday I also did this because on my Design Fiction Daily, my Design Fiction was a t-shirt, and I was like, oh fuck it, I'm just gonna post it to Etsy. So I posted this t-shirt on Etsy yesterday, right after I did my Design Fiction Daily.
Get rich.
Get richer, AI trying.
Yeah. This is good stuff.
And then I listened to, well, basically the general seminar from the other day was great. It was just really great conversation, and it was so generative. Like it was just like, oh, Design Fiction ideas were just
they're just popping all over the place.
Yeah, so I made one. That today's Design Fiction Daily is a report card from the
GP that was
future.
Wasn't that a good one?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Hey, so how do we, because how do we close the loop on this insofar as, like, I mean, maybe it's just an easy thing, but just mentioning to you, so like I really, really want to do a digest from it.
Yeah.
And also that's a lot of work, you know, like pulling the things, because I don't want it to be like the full thing. I felt like Dre will listen to it, or I guess it's a question.
I listened to it all. I even listened to the 20 minutes where I could hear you in the background being like, you were like reading or doing math problems or something. I just let it play in the background, and it was like, that's cool. Like,
a little ASMR of the
little Julian ASMR, just like rhyming off some.
I was probably talking to the dog and kind of printed stuff out. So I want to, so now I really want to do it, not just for the content, but also I want to close the loop, because I want to be able to say, hey, look at this amazing thing that happens.
Yeah.
Dre, aka Design Fiction Daily, aka Etsy / aka
I'm gonna post another
just
thing.
It's just building on it. It's like this beautiful kind of generative loop, and like no explicit endorsement, and this your DJ receives no proceeds from this, but he's got these amazing t-shirts. I go over there and check it out. And he's also got designfictiondaily.com, where he's just been, I want to You get what I'm saying? Like
No,
I
I
want it to be all like this beautiful
tentacles,
kind of tentacle, hectic,
hyper-collaborative.
crazy brew of like, what's going on? Oh, what did you do with the mulligatawny soup? You made it into like a, you know what I mean? Just like
Yeah,
things happening, or
yeah.
beautiful things are happening in this hyper collaborative experiment. New organs are growing. Ugh.
So the hyper collaborative octopus is a good good logo, good mascot. We should do
Yeah.
a plushie, little plushie octopus.
Yeah, I wish it
Um,
wasn't something so gooey. I'm not really into the biology stuff.
it's a fuzzy. I know I like it gooey too
You
sometimes.
do like it? Who was it was we were having, there was a call and I was trying to explain to the other guys about the whole hyper collaborative thing and the beautiful complexity of it, and Isra said like, hey, did you guys see the new fuck, who's that guy, who's the filmmaker who comes out who does really gross stuff, Existenz,
Yeah. Cronenberg.
Cronenberg.
His
Yeah.
latest one was great.
Oh God! So
Crimes of
he
the
said,
Future.
"Have you seen the new Cronenberg?" And I was like, and I was like, reach for the garbage bin because it's just like he totally grosses me out. And I was like,
Yeah.
no. He's like, well, it kind of sounds like what you're describing, like the near future laboratory is growing another organ. And again, I wanted to throw up forever and never stop because I find that kind of stuff so gross. I would rather it be like computer software metaphors.
Yeah, the body
It spawned a
horrors.
new process.
Yeah,
Not like
body
a
horror, and that is
"Ooh,
terrible, but it's
what's
awesome.
this thing? Oh my God, look at this. Is it cool or is it shocking? I don't know. Let's cut it open and see what kind of rides out of it. I saw I'm not even gonna try to watch it because it's just gonna be so gross no matter what, unless I really wanted to gross myself out. But also
Just
it's
listen
like,
to it.
is it just like sounds of meat kind of crawling over itself?
Yeah, stuff like that. Speaking of meat crawling over itself, uh,
You got a new design fiction daily idea out of that?
no, I don't actually. I do, and it comes from that general seminar. Another thing that came up that I thought was funny because they're talking about GPT futures for those who didn't attend. Somebody had talked about the idea of like in the future there'll be like a label of like natural writers, like the same way that like some people work out at the
Oh,
gym.
right.
They're
Yes.
natural workout. They don't use supplements. They don't, and then there'll be natural writers. And I thought that's so great because in the gym world, it's like, yo, are you natty? Like, that Liver King, everybody thought he was natty, but he wasn't natty. He was actually using supplements, natural,
Okay.
natty being short
Yeah.
form for natural. And I saw one of my design fictions on the list is natty writers.
Yeah.
So the idea that like, that's the new lingo. Like,
Yeah,
hey, did
that-
you write this? Did you write this natty? This is good.
Yeah.
It's a good story. Did you do this,
And then
natty?
and then what is that as a rubber stamp or like the embossed stamp like a notary? Like this has been officially recognized as natty,
Yeah.
or and some, because it's like legal, like some legislative body came up with an equivalent kind of, totally forced into it abbreviation for that. You know what I mean? You know how they'll be like legislation. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the US, like they'll come up with something that plays well as a headline for the name of the legislation, and it'll be an abbreviation.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it's like certified organic, like you see on
Yeah.
you see on product, right? That companies pay money to print,
yeah,
but not actually be organic.
yeah. Hey,
Camille.
feel free to say no. But
No.
I'd like to do the. Could we do the? Could I have the art for the Imagine Harder to do like a vinyl sticker or something?
Yeah, totally.
Just
I'll
get a
flip it
couple
over.
hundred of them.
Yeah.
Cool.
As
I
long
was
as you,
thinking like a rubber stamp because I've been
my
super
royalty
into-
is that you need to send me a bunch.
Oh yeah, like I've been doing these rubber stamps. It's not pulling focus. I did like these. I've been stamping the envelopes with it, but I think the colors matter. The Harley colors matter.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, because otherwise
Camille.
it just looks like a badge. Yeah,
And I think-
Camille, it's like
I think, I
Hello,
know, Lauren.
everybody. It's
my
been a
old
minute.
friend.
Yo,
Yeah, it's
check
been a
this out.
minute.
Check this out. Look at this. Look at this business.
Nice. Is my audio working?
Yeah, it's
Totally.
working great.
Totally working.
Oh, good. Okay. Excellent. How is everyone? What's happened in the last month?
Oh my God.
Everything.
So many
Oh,
things.
oh my God. I don't even know where to start. First of all, I ran out of label stickers for mailing just now.
Congratulations. It's a sign of
Thank you.
success. It's a metric.
It's totally a metric, isn't it? Yeah. So is becoming like kind of, you know, hey, what's going on, y'all? Like at the post office.
They know you now. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah. Open the blue door. It's that guy again.
Oh,
You bring the
yes, that's
dog?
exciting.
No, he didn't come today.
Oh man, Chewy's probably their unofficial mascot. Probably the
Uh,
friendliest dog they know.
everywhere he goes, they want to adopt him.
I do know someone whose dog is a model for Chewy.com. So, it is a pipeline.
A model. Um, gosh, what's
Yeah, it
going
has an
on?
agent and everything.
Yeah.
I learned some MongoDB.
Oh,
Tell us
nice.
more.
It's different to MySQL. It's
Yeah.
just a database thing, but Julian mentioned, or it gave me access to a database that has information about what we post on the Discord so that we could write a wrapped. And I'm getting to the point so I got everybody sort of in order of how much they've posted and things like that. So if it's not too late, then we could think about what kinds of other information you'd want to have about people to be able to send them a piece of information about it. So there are 930 users, and 500 of them have posted once. But then the rest of it sort of accelerate quickly into people who posted several hundred times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I think Jean Pablo is
I'm
still
going to learn more.
yeah, Jean Pablo is still near the top of the
Yeah,
list. Amazing.
I don't doubt it.
yeah.
Which is amazing. I'm just always like, whoa, man, you're still in here. Um, what was I gonna say? Yeah, so that's amazing, Brandon. Super glad you got a chance to look at that. The one thing, well, just in general, like Mongo-y stuff is I yeah, just over the last because I kind of got back into it just like a little bit because I didn't want to lose my my recollection because my README files are basically non-existent. Like, wait, what was that? What is this for? But the one thing that I'm actually that might be uh like a good area of focus is there's another database that comes from the React. So like if you click the button that says add to digest,
Mhm.
it it goes to I think it goes to another data. See here, this is where my README because I looked at it the other day. I can't remember if whatever. It's a database in amongst the Mongo stuff that I've got, and creating getting back to the idea of creating the digest for as another
Mhm.
way, another point of entry. Basically it's a read only entry in some sense to the
Yeah.
conversations so that and I don't know what we do with that, but the thing I was looking at, and I had been investigating, looking at different libraries and reminding myself of how to construct an RSS feed is some kind of RSS feed. And I don't know if we do that and make it into a subscription thing, so that way we can pay for the Mongo or whatever, or if it's just like another way where people can who are because it's the volume, it's like the equalizer is set up so it's just like, okay, just stuff that we flagged, we don't expect you to read everything, whatever. It's like a nice kind of human filtered thing so that people who are more active have the ability to click that add to digest button if they think that something is like, actually this is a really good thing, this is something that would be useful to someone. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like curated.
Yeah,
Like
sort of
if we collectively curated
a summary.
summary. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe they get, it's like every day there's like maybe one or two things. Like, and I've been looking at these other newsletters, some other, for pay newsletter where someone's like, it's two things a day. That's it. And one guy has got a newsletter, it's like, I think it's maybe one thing a day. And he just takes some number, some metric that he found on the internet, some article that says there are 5,233, whatever, seven Tesla autonomous vehicle deaths a day. And he says, and he just, that's it. That's my newsletter, $5 a month.
That's like, look at all these things I noticed. It's the correlation versus coincidence, right?
Mm,
Because you're paying for it, you feel maybe more compelled that this data is of value.
yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway, that's
sure.
something else. I think that one's like I think that's a pretty light lift. It just technically it's just a matter of getting around to being like, okay, so how do you actually cobble, what's the transform between this database, which I think just has indexes to message IDs. I don't think it actually has the message. So you got to do some kind of whatever Mongo's equivalent of a join is.
Mhm.
And I don't know I don't even know what you spit out. Is it the message content? I don't know. Anyway, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you want to find all of the things with the reacts for the digest, which we have.
Yeah, those are all there. By there I mean
Uh-huh.
they're in the data store. I think just as it's like a pair of IDs, I think.
Mhm.
I don't
But yeah,
even know if I
you want
pointed
to
you to the
generate
database.
the list of things. Yeah, I no, there's a database called React. Yeah, no, I can take a look at that um, as a process to be able to kind of generate a view of just those things, and if they have links and things like that as well to pull those out.
Members, yeah, reacts.
I'm just curious. This is for specific posts from Discord, which some you might want to, let's say, turn into an email or like a once a day going to subscribers email. Is that what you're talking about?
You got it.
Oh, wow,
Basically,
frozen.
the basic
Dang
idea.
it. Uh,
We got you.
Yeah, at this point, I only learned the very first amount about MongoDB, but I have learned other things in the past, so I can sort of tailor it around those kinds of things, which will be great.
Yeah.
Another cool thing that happened was there's a guy, Marcin Vickery, who made use of my book turning stuff for his page about for a book about keyboards. He asked me if I could use it. He could use it, and
Oh, cool.
how much it would cost. And I said, no, just use it. And so yeah, his page. If you click on it, you can open the book and turn the pages in it. So oh wait, I just said that to Siobhan. I don't know if I can change my message to everybody now. I'll send it in the Discord. Yeah, so that was cool.
Shit happens. Site. What's that?
Shift.
tip.
Oh, shift.
Shift happens. Amazing.
A book about keyboards.
The folks with shithappens.site really need to pay you some royalty because you're going to be sending a lot of people there.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh wait, did I?
This is
Someone
super
did someone mention this?
I mentioned I mentioned that he was looking at doing this. I do find the abruptness of the second page turn to make it seem like it's broken, but yeah. No, it's neat. It's a because nobody's used that library before. But hopefully it can be used as a way for people to turn pages on 3D in 3D on the internet in the future.
I think I subscribed to this, but I'm gonna subscribe again. I mean, this is totally the kind of book I would have. And the
I'm
fact that
surprised
it's
you don't
Yeah,
already have it.
I know there's over 600 pages. It's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'll make room.
Damn, I love. I mean, I kind of like how they implemented it. There's some little things like the navigation up at the top. I'm not sure if that's part of the library, that it shows you where you are pagination wise within the book. That's pretty nice. I like that they're changing the perspective. They're making the camera zoom in at certain times. That's a nice detail. Brando, we need to talk
Totally.
about how to make this thinner so that it applies to like a magazine.
Oh yeah, we need one for a magazine, Brandel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A magazine from
Yeah,
the
yeah.
future.
No, that would
Should
be very straightforward.
Dre, you should
I
tell
should
tell
put out
Brandel why
just-
we need it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hang on a second. Let's see if I can find I know I can find it. I've got some stills that I can actually hang on. I have a video.
So while Dre's digging that out, so we worked on a project with Patrick. Basically it was the whole year, most of the year, it turns out, with a client to and design fiction started out. We're not sure what we were going to do, and then we figured out that we were going to do the delivery was going to be a magazine from the future. That was going to be the design fiction archetype, and it was pretty amazing. Both to do it and then, if I do say so myself, the outcome. I think my stash of copies are meant to arrive today. But so we thought it was so cool and so easily kind of representable in a way that as an artifact, as opposed to just like generic, oh, we'll figure it out, that I was in the car one day and I was like, wait, is magazine from the future .com registered? And so registered it, and so we decided that's gonna be a thing now. So we're building magazine from the future as a it'll be on the third floor of the west wing of the Near Future Laboratory global headquarters, just taking up a little space over there. There's no heating, but we'll manage, because it just seems like it's so easy to kind of it's something you can really get your hooks into and talk about and say, look, what's our little scampy tagline? I can't even remember it. It can't be that good. A little bit fuzzy. Building a world is hard. Why not start with a magazine?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds perfectly delightful as an approach, and the library will be appropriate for it. Yeah, I made a modification to be able to accept the JPEG pages or PNG pages of the ABCs, but I just didn't put it up anywhere, but I can. And yeah, it occurs to me that, like, the pages are a little softer of a magazine because it doesn't have the weight of everything pulling it down, but that's possible to sort of encode, and it would be really nice for it. Cool.
I'm not sure if you guys are able to see the stills, if they're big enough, but yeah, the yeah, it's a pretend kind of like a AAA magazine, but it's from the autonomous division. It's called Autonomy Magazine. The can you pass the Turing test? Because it's all about camping and touring in the fall with AI vehicles. So yeah, we have full-blown articles talking about like centralized hubs. We have Los Angeles driving itself. So we have the AI gridlock. Got a nice cover, some cover options. Yeah, you can see a whole bunch of different things, like Gary, Indiana being like the top city for AI. We have the Bozeman Big Sky Rally, which is an AV rally car race. We've got all kinds of cool little ads. The drive-through becoming the drive to you, Dunkin' Donuts. How it affects insurance. We've Yeti has like autonomous coolers that you just hire and they follow you around wherever you go. We have a huge multiple page article about what we call the 29th Amendment, which is basically like repealing the right for humans to drive, and voices for and against the right for humans to drive in this amendment that was made once upon a time. We've got doing all kinds of neat stuff like using in painting to add autonomous RVs inside of like Yosemite things. We have I like this one. This is wallpaper. This is like exploring the metaverse, like a tour guide for the metaverse. This magazine is just chock full of I'll just go to play the video again while I talk. But yeah, it's chock full of ads and articles and brand type of ads and letters from readers and classifieds. So it really paints an interesting picture bit by bit of what this world kind of looks like. And that's why I think we're so excited about working on this magazine from the future concept and blowing it out even further, because rather than trying to come up with the idea of the world, we can just piecemeal write it together. And the great thing is, like, Julian might write one thing and then I'll be writing something else, and I'll have read Julian's and I'll pick a detail from his and add it into mine. So a reference to something in an article becomes an ad somewhere else. Like, we were joking about as seen on TV, and then Julian said, wouldn't it be cool if there was an as seen on Twitch equivalent? So I made an as seen on Twitch sticker that looks like the as seen on TV one, but purple. And Julian used it on one product. I use it on another product. I mentioned it in an article when we're doing product reviews with other stuff. So you can see how the interconnectedness of this big fuzzy octopus full of design fiction wielding instruments is just hyper collaboratively putting stuff together.
Super fun.
That's awesome. It reminds me a lot of some of the larger scale Burning Man art pieces where individual artists will build a small component which fits into the larger theme. And so that way you have basically, there's the scaffolding for the piece, and then people install their individual pieces, which then create something greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Speaking of Burning Man, I don't know how it came up. We were having one design discussion or whatever, and I don't know, just like tripped into Kingsford, what was it?
Charcoal.
Hydrogen briquettes.
Yeah. Kingsford
Because-
hydrogen briquettes. And
yeah,
they
'cause,
sponsor Burning Man in the
And
future. Kinda like
in the future, yeah, it's totally Burning Man's totally jumped the shark, and now it's sponsored by Kingsford, the barbecue briquette.
yeah. Basically, they Burning Man does what Coachella did.
Yeah, it's kind of
I
like
think
it's cooked. Let's find some corporate sponsors. Kingsford.
Burning Man has jumped the shark a lot. Like,
Yeah,
there's a lot of, I think of Burning Man as kind of the showroom if you make big art. You
Yeah.
got to get your piece at Burning Man so everyone else can see it. So they want it at their festival. So on the artist side of things, this is like, the showroom for your large scale work.
I feel like
Um,
it jumped ages ago. I mean, I'm not saying that
Yeah, it
anyone
really
was wrong
did.
or I knew before anyone else, but it's like I remember when I was considering going. This was like ages ago, and I was like, wait, there's a whole like kind of ticket thing. What you couldn't just. It was like it felt like started feeling complicated, and then a friend of mine who's been going since day zero, was like, hey, you're in town, like, you want to come over and see like the Burning Man headquarters? I was like, it's got fucking headquarters, and it's like all year round, it's running, and it's like you'll walk by it. I still remember the building, and the lights will be on in the middle of the night, you know. And I get it. It's like it's complicated, but it also felt like, nah, I don't know.
I remember when there wasn't a helipad to accommodate flights from Silicon Valley.
Cooked.
It feels like Burning Man is it's a lot like San Francisco, where it was much cooler 5 years ago, and it always is whenever
Yeah.
it's there. Like, no, it was cooler 5 years ago, and it was
Oh,
cooler
and
5 years ago, and it
it's
was
always
cooler.
5 years ago, even if it was like actually 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, people kind of like, nah, I don't know. Yeah, it was all right. They're there and they're kind of like a little bit sad and they're like Utilikilt and you know, shearling cowboy chaps and whatever. Giant weird party hat. Yeah, it was all right.
I feel like as soon as they started doing the Carabiner on mugs, that's when I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
see. Like, you know, product lines, event specific. Like,
I don't mean to hate on it, but
we
Shit,
can
now
hate
I
on
want
it.
to make
It's
a.
okay. It's healthy.
I get those you know, those there's just like a little bit of a weak signal where you're kind of like,
Well, someone
yeah,
recently,
have fun. Let me know when you're back. You know, we'll hang out.
yeah, I was talking to my buddy on the phone yesterday, and he was like, "Yeah, well, Mars is like the prep school for Burning Man." I was like, "Oh man, like everything is full circle now."
Yeah, which is all right. I mean, I like that things kind of that you can when you can just embrace the fact that things like they come into being, they
Yeah,
exist, they kind of mature, they you know, and then it's a cycle, and then let it die, let it die.
yeah, that's natural. That's the life death cycle. Like there needs to be some form of death and some form of change, and like I don't know, it's okay to normalize these things for other people, you know, and it's okay to get a corporate sponsor. And in some ways, it's good because then it forces people to create the next new thing, right?
I wish there was I wish that could happen with companies, you know, or like you know these other kind of formal structures where it's
Well,
like
they
there
just get
wasn't this.
acquired.
Well, and
It
but they don't die.
like
They don't die in the sense of like it's gone now. I mean, unless it's like, but it's always seen as like a tragedy, in some sense, like Radio Shack. You know what I mean, or
I
something.
I don't know. When I was growing up, this supermarket chain bought another supermarket chain, and the way they marketed it was like Albertsons and Lucky's are getting married. And that was like so positive. It's like a kid, you know, like looking at marketing, like these two shopping carts, like one's in like a veil. Like it was like this is so cute, you know. And then later it's like, oh no, this one bought that one.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's rare for companies. It seems like to want to be companies now. It seems like the only goal is to scale until you're bought by the next big property, then keep scaling or go public.
Internally,
Yeah,
I mean, the people and the interests and the concepts that happen in them stick around, sometimes with varying degrees of visibility. So like Lightform died earlier this year or late last year, but a number of the principles went to like Amazon, and it's pretty likely that they won't stop doing sort of projective augmented reality of various kinds. And so hopefully they'll get some stuff to see the light of day, and I'm going to keep my eye out for their names on things in the coming years. And yeah, similarly, like there are a lot of people who were involved, maybe not at Lightform, but at Humane, and whatever happens to Humane this year, they might come up with a product and that might be amazing and it might kill everything, or they might have to move on from it. But like the most interesting people will be taking the ideas that bug them, and hopefully finding new sponsors for them in the future. So I mean, yeah, it requires a slightly different granularity because it's people who have ideas, not companies. But if you have the tolerance for remembering how to map all of those together, then you can kind of keep track of the lineage of where interesting things happened and figure out who's about to come up with an interesting product in the future.
I think it's really cool that we're using terms like lineage and death for companies and ideas. I mean, it's very fascinating for me to think that a company died because you associate birth and death with this growth and discovery and a phase where you're clueless and you're playful and which we resonate with companies too, I guess. But this whole exchange was really fascinating because I like to think that like with Burning Man, right? Even if it's changed, and maybe for Julian and maybe for Camille, for you, it's no longer what you want it to be, but it's evolved into something other people probably want.
Hmm.
So you would like it dead, but somebody else might probably just want it for what it is, because that's all they've seen and they think it's good enough because the brand works. So I don't know if death is suitable there. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really it's fascinating. These kind of existential aspects, life death cycles of things and what they mean to people, right? That's really that's insightful. That
Yeah,
it's
I think a
not
lot of
going well.
engineering starts with like, I hear the term product life cycle all the time, but it fails to really explore the death part of the life cycle. And I think that's the shift that just industrial designers and engineers, for the most part, are taking now, is understanding like what does this look like when it's no longer being used? Because historically, it's always been about like how is it going to be used? How are people going to acquire it? How are we going to onboard people? How are they going to use it? But how do we like help people disembark? How do we show people what to do when the product no longer works, and where does it go, and what materials do we make it with so that it doesn't turn into microplastics in our lungs, that kind of stuff.
And there are some companies who kill products on a regular basis. I think there's a great website, Killed by Google, which basically has a
Yeah.
list of all of the projects that Google has killed. And Google gets a lot of grief for killing projects. And so it's an interesting thing that, on the one hand, we're talking about, oh, companies should die and products should die. Yet we also have companies that get grief for killing products on a regular basis. So it's an interesting tension, I think, because just because as someone was saying earlier, like just because a product is no longer for person X, it still might be for person Y, but
Right.
it may no longer be viable for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you get companies like Microsoft who have attempted to assert the death of Internet Explorer several times and have only succeeded by varying degrees. I think it's probably genuinely dead now. I haven't looked at browser stats in a while, but it was a long time coming. It was sort of trying to kill its own children, but finding it more difficult than it had anticipated.
I mean, they killed Clippy, right? Microsoft killed Clippy, and look where we are now.
And the other one, the crazy chatbot.
Well, that was because she was racist.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
Okay,
you had to,
Hey,
you had to put it
yeah.
there.
which
It's
I
like,
feel like was
oh my
like
God, look
very
at our child.
successful
It's like trying
social
to kill us.
engineering.
But I'm just saying, but seeing that Microsoft has like invested in OpenAI, like Clippy's coming back. Clippy's coming back with a vengeance. I can't wait.
Because of, sorry, why is that?
Well, because Microsoft invested in OpenAI, so they get first dibs on all the Chat GPT stuff. So,
Okay, so it'll be like the revenge. It'll be like Chucky, but the Revenge of Chucky.
Yeah. By the way, Chucky, that whatever the remake that they made of Chucky is kind of good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it funny?
It's funny, but it's kind of hard sci-fi. Like it makes sense. Like it's a chip gets tampered with at the assembly line, so this robot becomes evil, and it's just like it's a cautionary tale of like artificial intelligence and robotics, and I thought it was.
Is this Child's Play 2, 1990?
No, I think it's called
No,
Chucky.
this is Megan.
No, not well. Yeah. So there's one called Chucky, which is basically Child's Play. It's a remake, and I think it's called Chucky. And Megan is basically just like a spin-off of not a spin-off. It's just not a remake. It's just a ripoff. Sorry, a ripoff of Chucky.
Spelled M3 GAN.
Yeah. It's spelled BMW car GAN.
Okay. I love how it comes up with Megan, Duchess of Sussex in the sidebar. Get my people on that. Call someone at Google. Call Sergey. This is bullshit.
Yeah.
Megan movie, like Megan M3 GAN comes up as the first result, and followed by Harry and Meghan official trailer Netflix.
Well, given that 3 is next to E on the keyboard, I bet there are some fat-fingered searches that actually did intend for
Right.
that other result.
Totally. Totally. Oh, is it only in the theater? Oh man.
Um, this chat sort of, Dre, this chat makes me wonder if maybe there is a future where there's regulation that demands every company has to shut shop in 5 years, or every marriage has to dissolve in a 10-year span. It might be interesting to see how children
would
are
love
raised,
that.
what school books look
Yeah.
like to prepare people for, like, it's okay for things
Yeah.
to end, to die, to cease.
Yeah.
What kind of teaching material would we have to prepare kids?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I go straight to I'm not excluding, you know, other potential artifacts to kind of represent what that world looks like, but I kind of go to like what is the legal structure? So in other words, what is the name of the temporary autonomous, you know, corporate entity? You know, there's a you know, there's in the US there's LLC, there's limited partnerships, there's C corps, S
LPUD.
corps, B corps, all that kind of stuff. So
DAO.
one where it's like, yeah, like this one, okay, do you want, is it a 3-month company, a 6-month company, 9-month company, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? And all the infrastructure, all the you know, all the paper, the legal paper is set up for that, and people are like, yeah, this is good, let's just see where this goes. And then there are all these kinds of like, check the box if you want all your IP to kind of go into this kind of public domain container, or this one, or you want it burned, you know, burn all the IP, it's no longer exists, and it's free for someone else to be like, hey, I saw that thing, I'm going to build on that.
Yeah. All patents get forfeited after so long.
Yeah. And it's a different
That'd be
word.
amazing.
It's not forfeit, it's a different word, because forfeit sounds
Oh, not yeah.
Sounds
Jordan?
like you gave up. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't sound like, you know, the natural
It's
death that
benefited
closure
to.
brings.
Yeah,
you know,
benefited
like,
to, yeah.
what's all the language
Bequeathed.
that yeah, all the
Bequeathed
language
to the social treasury.
like the thing that
Well, there's
that Yvon Chouinard had, you know, I mean, he's got a platoon of
Free
lawyers, but
parking.
that he had trouble doing. It sounds like it was such a weird thing to basically give his company to nature or whatever. You know, I haven't looked at the legal documents.
Yeah.
But like that
There's
is
a
just like a
concept
thing you
in-
can do.
Yeah, nature's the shareholder, the majority shareholder of
Yeah, and everything must
Patagonia?
benefit this other, Patagonia. And what does
There's
that
a
mean?
concept in Japan of wabi-sabi. It's the transience and imperfection, and so you could call it like a B Corp, but a wabi-sabi corp.
Oh, I thought that was the stuff you put on sushi. My bad.
For me, the interesting thing is like, what then is like, what was the what was the event or revolution that caused the institution of that social construction? Or, you know, existing capital wants to stay around. There are entrenched positions of power and wealth, family offices, etc. Like, how do they structure things to basically shield themselves from this permanent, from transitory state? Like,
Do you mean
how can they preserve wealth through, even though there's a legal structure that exists designed to try to thwart them?
You mean like, what was the event, like the kind of like large scale, like global systemic kind of
Yeah.
reflection on? Yeah, I think it's now. I think it's what's going on now.
I don't know if we're gonna overthrow like wealth.
I'm not saying that we are. I'm saying that in the design fiction mode, it has happened, and so and once you start dreaming into that and feeling into that, that sense of doubt that you just kind of reflected starts to slowly melt away, and that it could be done if you create that image of it.
Yeah.
I know, I totally get it. I'm not saying that you're, you know.
Yeah, no. I'm just trying to think like, what
Well,
would be that precipitating event? Like that.
That's the
Well,
that's the
like
fun thing about crypto and
the Patagonia thing
tokenomics, you
happened.
know? Like, coins can destroy themselves. You know, you can limit how much coins can sort of change hands if you have like a soulbound token. So like, it only lives in this wallet, you know?
I think
I don't know.
we're hoping
In
that
terms of limiting generational wealth, that seems like a good tool for that.
Well, considering that corporations are granted the same rights and privileges as a human, an individual, they should tie, a corporation could get tied specifically to an individual. So an individual can open up a corporation, and if that individual dies or ceases to work, then the corporation dies. It's like always, it's soul bound. The corporation is soul bound to an individual, and then there's no such thing as, let's say, the genetic dynasty of generational wealth that's currently going on with corporations.
Yeah,
There's
so
always
then
a
you get
co-op
things like the
structure.
Mongolian Empire.
I mean, a co-op where the employees own the business. At that,
Mhm.
at which point, you could sort of force a co-op structure, where it's like if the employees don't want to own it, then it dissolves.
I mean, so to draw on some more of my favorite anarchist leftist anthropological history, in the book The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow, they talk about a couple of times where it seems like there's been like catastrophic revolutions against long dynastic sort of reigns, and so they end up with like really kind of virulently anti-accumulationist policies. So somebody can be in charge of everybody, but at the end of their reign, they have to undergo a very, very public and very ritual suicide where they've got to dismember themselves in front of a cheering crowd in order to ascend to the heavens. And so, you could see that happening to the like CEO of big tech. And other places where it's the dawn of everything. Amazing book. And some of the talks that they did, especially the talks when Graeber was still alive, are really great. But yeah, like there are various points where there have been revolutions against like increasingly unequal environments, and then people have codified various forms of things. And one of the things that they posit is that it seems like maybe East Coast Native Americans underwent some kind of catastrophic anti-authoritarian revolution about 300 or 400 years before first European contact. And so the result of what was seen there wasn't the state of nature, but actually a really spirited and intentional exercise of anarchic power that was built to buttress against some of the things that they, increasingly fading off into sort of legendary memory, but of bad ways that people were together. But yeah, like being able to imagine that in the context of just organizations and the entrenched power, and having just like building everything out of laws that sunset would be really appealing. When I had a company back in New Zealand, that was definitely something that I was really taken by, to the point where our lawyer was just incredibly sick of my mentioning the word sunset. But yeah, lots of interesting precedents in various anthropological pasts, but fun to play with them in a modern technological context.
Yeah. I think that's what people were. I mean, I was to a certain degree, like kind of seeing the possibility of this with, the whole, I guess, crypto thing. It was less the money and more like, oh, can you code different weird, interesting things so that the value receipt, the stock certificate or whatever, had that characteristic built into it in some fashion. It doesn't make sense in such a wonderful way that you want to kind of push through it and try to imagine what would make sense and what would be just kind of hygienic, normal. Like, I want to rent a company for a couple weeks so I can have these utilities and facilities to operate in a particular mode.
Reminds me of like renting a commercial kitchen.
Ghost companies. So
Yeah, well, it's like those there's this one storefront on Wall Street Avenue that's just like post office boxes. It's like, yeah, have your address on Wall Street. Like that's the whole value proposition. Your business's mailing address is on Wall Street. Like
right.
sort of respond to what Justin said, I've just sort of cooked this up. There's two things, which is one, that the idea was never to imagine how that future came about. The idea was just to make us believe that that future would be cool. And then I'm pretty sure all of us would get together and be like, yeah, we want to make it happen and let's come up with ideas. That was one feeling I had. The second one was, imagine how it actually happened, is that one company grew so large that it controlled all of the banking the back processes behind the banks. But then they had a bug, and there was this one day we all wake up and the whole world's bank balance is zero. And we had to kickstart from there, and we realized that it's nice to reset because people are more egalitarian and nicer. Maybe that was the event that made us realize, a reset every 10 years, or maybe it's like every decade is a reset. And everyone's reset is basically the amount of money a company has is equal to the living wage multiplied by the number of employees it has, or something like that. And it just sort of, then you build the world from there and try and think how people can be better. I don't know, imagination. The Great Reset, yeah.
Graeber thinks there are.
I love how you're putting this in a
resets.
positive light. Like most people, when they talk
Graeber
about
says that there were.
concepts. Sorry, Brandel,
Yeah,
you
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh no, you go ahead.
Graeber said that the Jubilee is a cancellation of debt every 49 years. So and that they're like in every seventh 7 year was important in sort of Hebrew and Proto-Hebrew cultures and things, and so that it was a reasonable sort of period to break long chains of servitude, so that it's sort of 1 and a bit short lifetimes, but it's not enough to create massive intergenerational sort of problems. And so yeah, it seems like there have been structures like that, and people go into it in Dawn of Everything, but that's also in the book Debt, the First 5,000 Years, which talks about the concept of currency trade value and what sort of inequalities do or do not sort of emerge from various concepts of credit.
There's a
Sorry, Camille.
this podcast or series of short videos. I just like The Great Simplification. It's more about what's going to happen now that we're sort of on the other side of like the carbon boom, right? Like, you know, for anybody who thinks that we're past peak oil or anything like that, like if we had sort of a one-time shot at fossil carbon and sort of an increase in energy, what happens when we have to come to grips with like the idea of being post-growth? This guy has a lot of really smart people on there. Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about like multipolar traps.
Daniel Schmachtenberger. This guy. I love this guy.
Yeah, he's a real treat. You know, it's like somebody's going to cut down the trees, so you may as well. Somebody's going to fish the fish, so you may as well. But it, you know, raises the question for me is like, you know, with sort of near future stuff, like what are the material flows that we could redirect that would actually, you know, sort of start to close loops on things that would be meaningful, you know, whether it's data, whether it's finance, could be food, right? I mean, like, you know, what are the materials that you could redirect the flow of such that you would make a less cynical society who is, you know, at least in the back of their heads aware that somebody else is, you know, taking all the fish out of the ocean, so I might as well get my bag too. You know, is there a more holistic set of relationships that could be imagined? Like, I'd like to go over there. That sounds great.
That sounds pretty much like the world we're living in right now. I mean, is this great desperation to grab as much as we can. I hear myself say that at home often. We like the future's so uncertain. I don't mind working for a large corporation now because I really need some money to have some security in my future. Those thoughts are terrifying, but it seems like, you know, that future is here. For most of us, again, given my context, I noticed that it's urgent, where yeah, finances might wipe clean tomorrow. So yeah. I had this thing about the thing you talked about depression, the sort of a slump in economy coming. I had a very old friend who now works at Wall Street. So I wrote to him and I said, we should get back in touch. It's been about 5 or 6 years. And he was like, yeah, we should talk. And then I said, yeah, I really want to talk about how maybe an economic downturn is good for humanity. and I didn't hear back from him. Just, just started dying. Really nice guy.
Just can't. It's so off putting that they just can't. I can't even say, hey, look, here's the reason why I can't write back to you. It's just like, oh, what you said you had herpes?
I should have sent it to his Wall Street email ID. That would have been even more fun. But no.
It's a problem. Like it's not even legible, and it causes such a visceral reaction that it's like I can't even reply to you. Let's assume that it didn't go to spam or whatever. You know, it got to them, and they're just kind of like
It didn't. We were very, very good friends. I mean,
stunned.
we
Like
together
you were
for 4
sitting,
years.
you're sitting at a table with a couple of pints in front of you, and the pints just arrive, and you're like, "This is what I'd like to talk to," and they just get up and walk away. Don't even say like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry, I can't do this." Just like boom, or they just you know, in the version of the movie of that scene that I direct, it's just like they just go poof, and they just disappear, and you're like, "Whoa, the fuck did I just say?"
I think it was Upton Sinclair who said it's difficult to get a person to understand something when their salary depends on not understanding it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, they just can't
Well,
even
I mean,
grok it.
there are economists who understand it. You know, like there are some people who've written, I don't know if it's Freakonomics or if it's Graeber, but people who talk about what the sort of the capital allocation consequences of abolition were in terms of the destruction of value, because people were sort of directly attributable as sort of assets and balance sheets, and then they weren't. There were some actual reparations paid to slaveholders for that, more so than the people who are enslaved themselves. But another similar sort of quantity of capital destruction was the Second World War, and people credit it with being a phenomenal motivator for value, because it wasn't locked up in places where it wasn't moving, so like you know, I think that the basic notion of what it is that capital and value is something that we need to look at, because like kind of doesn't make sense for it to be stagnating. In like, on the one hand, like personal saving is good, but when everybody saves, then that means that value no longer exists. Money only really matters to an economy when it's moving, and so yeah, like it means that mass saving is a liability to the coherence of the concept of value itself. And at some point, you know, maybe people will think of mass saving as an existential threat to the validity of that currency. It doesn't appear to be on its way at the moment, but yeah, like people have thought about it that way, and I would love for you to try your friend again at some point and see what they come back with.
It makes me wonder about.
I can find some references for that as well.
You know, like a third place, you know, people are sort of defensive of the home and they're defensive of the business, right? Those are all places where people want to be really protective of their profits. But a third space where you can go that isn't home and isn't work is a place where you can maybe have a different set of values that, you know, and potentially spending time in that third place could change the way that you spend your sort of emotional or financial assets, you know, at home or at work. The sort of the anti, like, you know, the bad version of this would be the church, right? Which is sort of has endemic to it this idea of over saving, right? Like they don't even pay taxes on their savings. So you know, what's like the anti-church third place that we could ask people to go to get different values that would affect the way that they do business or spend time at home. Personally, like, you know, skateboarding provides that, because you end up with sort of a network of people around the world who are gathering around, you know, gravity play for the most part, and then they end up sharing resources and sort of, you know, organizing their sort of pathway through the world together for purposes that are just like thrill seeking, as opposed to you know, I mean, it's its own sort of devotion, but it's not quite you're not praying exactly or tithing, except like with the, you know, skin or some bones.
I feel like the thing we said about how people, when they're paid to not think about something, if they hear it, it just stuns them. Maybe that's the solution to the whole idea of the world being okay with a reset, which is that perhaps you're not okay with the reset because we're all hoping for eternal life. We're always hoping to grow, and the idea of growth is inherent in what we do. Get better, get ahead. But perhaps if the whole world thinks about, this is good enough, like the whole Swedish lagom, this is good enough. That perception change, or that entire perspective change, is what will lead to companies not wanting to grow for the sake of growth. Or if they get too big, they sort of dissolve into smaller components. We have this idea of any company that's more than 10% the value of blah, 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 then you have to split. You split, you split, you split. It's like, bacteria. You can't get too large because
there are structures that are not so far-fetched that we had in the United States that sort of helped with that. For example, in the 1960s, late 1960s, that sort of move that precipitated the development of Xerox PARC was that we had a 90-something% marginal corporate tax rate. It wasn't 90% tax on all corporate profits, but it was a tax beyond a certain point, which meant that there was simply no value in profiting beyond a certain level, which meant that companies and the values of the people that run them could be made manifest in other ways, like expanding or spending that money on research and development. And that's where you got Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center, that was responsible for the network, the laser printer, and the first sort of personal computer. It was because that was a mechanism of corporate largesse that they could countenance kind of spending their money on, because it was basically a law of gravity that if they made too much money, and it was sort of seen as too much money, that they wouldn't get to keep it. So just ratcheting up things like marginal corporate tax rates on profit could have a significant effect, and maybe seeding some of the ground for what people think are reasonable activities. Something that was really awesome when I went to the East Coast in 2010, before I've moved to the United States, was thinking about the way that it was beneficial for New York City that the elite pissing contest was being a benefactor, and would that we could encourage that in other places, so that people could sort of compete for having their name or their lineage's name on a better pile of bricks. And you see sort of some faint sort of efforts and gestures like that. There's a small rock garden near the bike path by my house that was sponsored by TurboTax, but it's a far cry from the kind of great structures and presumably, hopefully, public benefits that flow from them in New York City.
The TurboTax Zen Garden. Love it.
Yeah, bunch of accountants hanging out there with those little beautiful rakes.
I mean, I know we're on time, but Brandon, I kind of do something similar with my life. I try and do it, is that I look at my savings, and if I have about 5 years of runway, I can imagine I can live okay for about 5 years and have my insurance in set. Then I'm trying to just throw all that money into hiring a lot of young designers and being like, you know what, do these crazy projects, because it'd be fun and something comes off it. Again, I've only been doing it for about 2 years since I became debt free, but it's been a lot of fun, and it's leading to better and better work, which is my return investment. But that's actually how somebody got in touch with me who told me about these office hours. So seeing value in something that's non-monetary is hard for many people in the world, maybe a vast majority, but for the ones who can, perhaps it has to be instilled in how we approach the world, that it's fine to not want more. It's hard.
I think that not want more is a key thing, because
And that's also a moral
we're grown
judgment.
into that. Like it's something that is just part of the air we breathe from day zero.
Well, we're told that if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And when you run a business, the idea is that every year you got to be making a little bit more money or a lot more money than you did the year before. And the way I run a business is that some years I make more money than others. And it doesn't matter if I don't make as much money this year as I did last year, because I get to do things. I get to live life on my own terms. and not making the same amount of money or more than you did last year isn't a sign of death, nor is it a sign of stagnation. It's just the dynamic range by which your company operates at.
In a weird way, the fluctuation makes something more alive than like a robotic, just straight growth. Like life is fluctuating.
Yeah, like some years you get to go on a really awesome vacation, personally, in your personal life. You go a really great vacation on some years, and some years you don't. It doesn't mean that year sucked. It doesn't mean that like nothing happened because you didn't go on the epic big vacation. It just means that that year was different. You did other things. You used your time differently.
If you really think about it, for every 7 human days that are lived, humans only, even today, only really work for about 2 days to live for the remaining 7. You have your childhood and youth, you have your retirement, you have people who are unwell, you have your weekends. So you really go down that path, you're actually not working and producing money for a vast majority. So it's just that the sort of recalibrating that is very important, and which is why I thought education might be core to how we perceive closure, failure, and coping. Might be fun. I think I'm gonna try that with the course I run. So I'm gonna try and see if I give this future where people are okay with cessation, and see what students make of it.
We
Sorry,
have
Yeah.
what's the course?
No, so if you remember some time ago, I had said that I want to think of this go bag for the future, and try
Right,
and
right.
influence. And then that evolved into me being too scared about a go bag because the idea of go bag is alien to me too much. And then it's grown into the paragraph I sent to you on Discord. And I'm a week away from going there and setting up, and I'm terrified because I've never done any design fiction work, right? So this is all winging it. So it's
You're
going
gonna
to
be
be 3
fine.
weeks.
You'll be fine, my friend. We've been talking enough that I feel like you'll melt right into it. It'll be beautiful.
Fun.
Yeah, let us know how it goes for sure.
I will. And I really miss these sessions. Life was very haphazard. And so I'm really glad I jumped in today. It's been too long. So I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
you've been talking a lot
Oh,
about birth and then death. It's interesting that we don't have a lot of rituals. Like we have rituals effectively around companies going public, the foundation of company, celebrating those things, but we don't have rituals on the other end. That funerals are something that we often experience very infrequently, for many folks, or to attend at all. And so it'd be interesting to think through what might be those rituals that celebrate the shutdown of a company, the death of an organization, the cessation
Yeah.
of
Well, I mean, we don't experience the funeral ritual as often, but there are things like there's the wake, which is interesting because wakes were a way of putting a body on display and waiting to just see if they'd wake up, because sometimes people died, but they weren't really dead. They thought they were.
I never knew that. Is
Yeah,
that it?
that's why it's called a
Oh
wake.
my God.
Yeah, because some people would have like a stroke, or some people would get some kind of like paralysis or something.
Yeah, I think he's just really tired.
Yeah, and they weren't like checking pulse or breath or anything. He was just really tired. Actually, he had mono, or he was just super bored. And so rather than, and this is like back in the Edgar Allan Poe days when they would bury you with a little string on a bell, so that if you woke up in the coffin, you would jingle the bell and someone would come and dig you up. So they were like, how about we save ourselves the trouble, throw them in the living room, surround them with tiny sandwiches, and just hang out for a while. And if he's
drink some booze.
If he hasn't gotten up to grab one of these tasty sandwiches by the end of the week, then
we'll sing a dirge really loudly, and
we'll throw him in the hole with the rest of the sandwiches, with the leftover sandwiches, and then and we're done. And I think that so there is the wake, and then there's this other idea of like, I don't know if you've seen the guys with the dancing with the coffin dance meme, but it's like, that's like one of my favorite things. It's like, yeah, that's how I want to, when I'm done, do that. it's these pallbearers that are like dancing. It's this awesome, energetic dance. And it's like, yeah, that's the way you got to go. But yeah, I think there are some other rituals beyond the ones that we know that could be added to just end a life in general. There's a documentary that I listened to on CBC about somebody who applied for MAID, which is the assisted death program here in Canada. And yeah, just basically had a party at like, let's have some favorite food, favorite people, favorite music, plan your situation, inject you with the thing, go out in a really, really like pleasant, peaceful, celebratory way. What is it? Don't be sad because it's gone, be happy because it happened type of attitude. So yeah, maybe some rituals around like being happy because that business happened, and just because it's gone, and its departure means the birth of the next thing, and what good can they bring to the world.
Yeah. Hey, I'm really curious, Aaron, your perspective, because I know I've noticed you've been trying to get a word in edgewise. These guys can be like really, but the fact that you've got an enterprise.
Me, yeah. Well, I mean, just my sort of initial thought here is like that, like the death industry itself is extractive, right? So like, what does it look like when you have a non-extractive end of life cycle? But I mean, yeah, like the end of things. I mean, the businesses that I'm attached to, I mean, at least one of them takes people's waste streams and turns it into new stuff. So along the way, instead of making trash, you can make stuff that's profitable. But I mean, I do you guys know about the Jevons paradox at all? This is this idea that like no matter how much efficiency you get, you'll always end up with more consumption.
Absolutely.
And so I mean, that's sort of that's the struggle I have while working on this business that I do work at. Like, if you just help people take out their trash, do you end up just making more problems? And are you not sort of already accelerating things?
Well, also, like, you can extract a lot, but the energy it takes to extract is kind of the whole question: is it worth it, right?
Well, right. So we're, there's depending on where you're seeing that extraction now, right? Like we're going to reach a point in certain areas where it costs more to extract the energy, or it takes more energy to extract the energy than the amount of energy that you get out of it.
Yeah, assuming that like energy is like your deliverable, right? Like I've heard about plants that mine human stool to get like rare earth minerals and stuff, right? And then like that byproduct can be turned into something else, and it gets turned into something else again.
Yeah. The company I work for takes carbon emissions and turns them into fuels and plastic precursors and things like that. So it's sort of like instead of having the fossil carbon in the ground, you just have to use the carbon in the air to make stuff. The extent to which like the society, like I don't know, the extent to which like the society is different when you're no longer taking stuff out of the ground. There's another really great book. Actually, Julian, I'm curious if you know this one, Technics and Civilization, Lewis Mumford.
Yeah, of course, classic.
Yeah, super good. And like his sort of basic premise at the beginning of the book is that like the sort of mentality of the mine, right? Like the space of the coal mine ultimately becomes like the mental framework for the entire culture, and that like from like the beginning of mining all the way through to all the world wars, that like the logic and the mental space of like toiling away in the dark for sort of this like meaningless work, it becomes what everybody's doing, and talks about everything from the inability to actually say when enough is enough, because everybody's speculating against each other, and I mean there's just all kinds of insecurity that are sort of endemic to that model, that then just becomes sort of the way of living for everybody, and then points to this notion too that like the present is not necessarily better than the past, right? And I don't mean that in sort of like a nostalgic way, right? But like there are definitely sort of like industrial folks who just like couldn't believe that it was at all possible that cities weren't more filthy before or more disease ridden before industrialism. They were like, well, this must be the best of all possible worlds. When in fact, that, you know, to your point, like we weren't necessarily all working as much before. I mean, even if we work 2 of 7 days now, we work a lot of them. They're full days.
So
Yeah,
that paradox, if I understand, so helping people to get rid of the stuff that they don't want to see around them, the paradox is that it leads to them just being like, okay, well, just that was easy enough. Is that it? Is that the?
With the Jevons paradox, well,
Yeah.
it's just that you can't get away from further consumption, right? Like as engines get more efficient, you know, you just burn more oil, right? Like there I guess maybe the idea is that like you don't necessarily get across a certain threshold of efficiency where you're like, okay, cool, that's good now. Like we can hit cruise control and just like live comfortably, right? You know, whether it's the go bag or the chore coat, right? Anything where you're like, I actually have the tools that I need to survive, and we're set. Growth sort of remains the imperative. That's sort of like that's the classic thing about. I'll link it here, but yeah, it's JEVONS.
Outside of a capitalist context, it also just means that when you increase the efficiency of something, then you lower the threshold by which it becomes worthwhile to do it for any reason, including for profit motives. And so people who see a resource, like say aluminum, and they go, oh, aluminum would be really cool, but it's too expensive for the specific thing that they do. Like, for example, aluminum used to be more valuable than gold. And so Napoleon had gold forks and knives for his guests, and then ate with aluminum ones because they were even more fancy than the gold ones because of the cost of extraction before electrolytic kind of stuff. But as aluminum became cheaper and cheaper, more people took a look at it and were like, "This is suitable for our needs." And you know, you see that with the sort of the Moore's law hasn't resulted just in like the people who did computing in the 1960s being able to do it for cheaper, but more people being able to recognize computing as being relevant and valuable to their needs. And so, you know, there's this little 486 that's smaller than a keycap that should be coming out on the 15th for less than $2. And the kinds of things that people will use computing for at that point are going to be terrifying. So yeah, Jevons paradox is like most commonly applied to aluminum, in that reducing the cost or reducing the use of it has resulted in more of it, and it's because people can then imagine the way that they can use it in their thing that they've just been sort of jealously staring at because they haven't had the opportunity to be able to do it based on the cost.
But I mean, it strikes me like, you know, the main problem is that we just don't have guaranteed housing and basic income and healthcare. That like if you just took care of those basic needs, that then you would get rid of this idea of the need for growth. Like the reason we're growing is because we're not yet safe, right? On an individual level, we have like mass insecurity. And if you just knew that you were going to have a roof over your head, you knew that you were going to have a meal, you knew that you could get sick, you knew that you could take time off, we would like this whole we would no longer need to worry about a future because we would be in a sort of permanent present. And like I don't think it's a particularly radical idea. But like, you know, this idea of like where we're trying to go, like I think we're just trying to go somewhere safe. And it doesn't feel safe, right? Like what community, what society, what family, right? Like you know, and like what God for that matter, like, you know, to whom are we actually like, you know, doing any, or for whom are we doing anything? And like in the name of what? And I think it's primarily like we just want to feel like safe and warm and like we're having a little bit of fun. And I don't think it's particularly hard to imagine that world, except that we spend so much time trying to just get to the space of that imagining, because most of us are born into debt.
I think it helps to
Damn.
stop.
Damn. Damn.
It helps to stop watching the news, because when I stopped reading newspapers, I had less fear of how awful the city around me is. And I just felt like it's okay. I mean, life is fine. I'm not going to get stabbed the minute I step onto the street in London. It's okay. So maybe that's one step that helps. On the paradox and Jevons paradox, when I was interning with this thing called ITDP, They build bus transit systems in cities. And they told me that most cities try and build bigger roads when they have traffic problems. And their insight to city planning councils always was that you build a bigger road, people buy more cars, and your traffic will get worse. So don't build bigger roads, make them narrower, make it worse for people to drive, and then your traffic situation will improve, which is counter to how we think. So maybe sometimes growth and a depression is good in the economy for people to really begin to appreciate life and be like, this is enough. I'm not insecure. I will survive.
Right, and I think that's something that I was really thinking about in the context of Jevons paradox, is that all we have to go on is the cognitive costs rather than material costs necessarily. And corporations do a reasonable job of mapping them to what actual bottom lines are. But if you can just replace the actual sort of difficulty of some form of material extraction with some obligatory, like, cognitively demanding thing. So if you just make something annoying, then you'll get less of it. Like, tax the things that you don't want to happen in society. And if you can come up with like holistic enough ways of being able to kind of imagine and apply those taxes, then you can just do it for all of the things that you hate. And hopefully, even if they are sort of materially less intensive, then you can reduce the quantity and speed of them elsewhere.
But then the motivation is just to, make more money so you can afford to, get better tax lawyers to find you better loopholes, right? Or become some class that like somehow doesn't get taxed for whatever reasons or doesn't get taxed in the same way.
Right. Well, so then maybe you need to envision sort of alternative structures of what it is that taxes. So it's not that, it's not even, say, a monetary cost, but if certain things happen in your life, then you have to go and watch DMV videos for a certain number of hours a year.
Well, one of the fun things.
Make it punitive, more punitive than it already is. And it's already like, I don't know, it depends on, I guess, who you ask.
I don't know if folks have been following this, but with all the sanctioning of Russian oligarchs after the invasion of Ukraine, one of the things that has been really interesting is watching what's been happening in the world of super yachts, which I just find fascinating as like these symbols of just massive excess capital. And someone was mentioning earlier how it used to be that millionaires and billionaires in the US would compete by donating buildings. I mean, Carnegie libraries, et cetera, et cetera. Like now the competition is whose boat is the biggest. I mean, the description of some of these boats, just as a side note, they are like Bond villains. Like they have built-in submarine docking facilities in the hull of the yacht. Some of the yachts have so many toys. They have a second yacht, which is a tender, which has all of the helicopters and ski-doos and everything else. But the challenge has been, to come back to the question of taxation, is that virtually none of these yachts are held in the name of the actual oligarch. There are multiple shell companies that redirect through multiple jurisdictions, and it has been a heck of a time trying to figure out who actually owns these yachts and how do you hold them accountable. Because the other interesting thing is these yachts are Dre, was that a commentary on yacht design?
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just opening up a swag bag that I got from the Near Future Lab shop here. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. But I think the part of the reason I was earlier on was asking a question like, what's the precipitating event to transition into this new space? Is there are such systems in place today to hide and protect assets that even if you were to enact some of the tax rates that existed in the 40s or in the 30s,
They wouldn't apply. Like taxes are way more punitive now than they ever were then.
yeah, but
Because it's this like weird game.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, as soon as taxes increase, people find loopholes, and then it's just kind of this trying to cut the head off the snake. When, more of a, I guess, sort of cultural shift needs to happen.
Yeah, and that
in terms of the move back to, the world where libraries, et cetera, are a means for rich people to compete. But that implies that there's like a kind of moral standard that everyone holds, and that doesn't exist anymore. And that exists like less and less in societies, that are less homogenous.
Yeah, it's. Do you folks talk about pace layers, sort of where fashion is this thing that moves the fastest and changes the fastest, and below that is commerce, and then it's infrastructure, governance,
Yes.
culture, and nature. And really, what we're it to make this sort of seismic shift would require changes at lower pace levels for society as a whole. And that's part of what prompted me at the very beginning to ask, like, what's the precipitating event? Because I can imagine the future of like if we get to that state, but it's such a large phase transition from where we are today. And there are enough.
It reminds me
think-
of
Go ahead.
reminds me of Rudyard Kipling and his role in writing engineers' culture. So well, maybe everybody knows it, but so Rudyard Kipling, the author of like Jungle Book and stuff like that, was responsible for writing a bunch of kind of poetry and customs and lore for engineers in Canada, largely as a response to a massive mechanical disaster that killed a bunch of people, including a bunch of engineers, and so they created this culture kind of out of whole cloth about an oath and wearing a ring that has SOAR stuff on it in order to remind people of the kind of the power and responsibility that engineers wield. And it's awesome. Oh, it's awesome to see you. Thank you for coming. And yeah, like having the opportunity to do that, getting somebody to write something in that way would be phenomenal. And to think about the ways in which sort of culture can be kind of designed and created would be awesome. It also reminds me of the movie Wag the Dog, and somebody having to write an election campaign. Yeah, it would be great. I've got my friend Henry, who's also on this Discord, decided that he enjoyed writing video games much more than he enjoyed writing books, for the same reason, is that being able to be responsible for dynamic systems that have values that are sort of impressed on people as a consequence of their actions within it was a much more appealing way of kind of generating worlds than just telling a single story within them. And so if you could get some really good writers interested in that question, then we maybe still need a precipitating event, but at least we have the ability to do something with it. Also, thank you for smoking. Just wonderful sort of context of sort of backseat writing of stuff. I can't wait till my daughter's old enough to watch it.
That's a related.
I think.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think maybe a starting point for this would be kill insurance companies, reintroduce liability. If you make everything like a higher risk proposition, companies will act way more responsibly. As soon as you remove liability from the equation, it like only becomes about profits. And like, I think, yeah, I think that's, I guess, the best way maybe to create a future about this would be, what happens when, we don't have insurance companies anymore, because they insure protection for so many companies. There's so many weird things that are insured, like you wouldn't have systems like, what was that band like Aerosmith, who like, asked them to remove green M&Ms from the bowl to see if they had read the full rider. Like you wouldn't have all of these sort of systems in place where people have to check other people.
I thought it was Metallica. Was it Metallica?
Maybe it's Metallica. I don't know which it was.
It was Van Halen.
Oh, was it Van Halen?
Yeah, but like, you
Jay-Z?
wouldn't have to spend all this extra energy kind of checking, because there'd be kind of more goodwill, because the liability risk was so much higher, because it wouldn't be covered by insurance, and companies wouldn't be protected in that, they're like, because yeah, I
What were you
don't
gonna
know if you guys.
Sorry, I'm curious what Aaron was going to say.
Oh yeah, sorry about that, Aaron.
Sure. No, yeah, I mean, to Randall's point about video games versus books, I started in like skateboard journalism, and now I make skateboards, and there's just sort of a difference between like documenting a culture and like making the object that you would use to actually like be a part of the culture. So I just like that just resonated with me quite a bit, because like, you know, play space as sort of the thing that is generative of values, like the values get to come somewhat more passively than if you were to like go and read them in a book.
Hmm.
You know, it's sort of like the difference between you know, libraries versus universal education, right? Like, you know, a library assumes that you have the time to go and seek out the knowledge, whereas like a free education assumes that you're actually like going to, you know, be supported in the pathway to get some kind of knowledge. But it also just makes me think about that. There's another book, Homo Ludens, that is all, it's like, it begs the question of whether play comes out of culture or culture
Yeah,
comes out of play.
that's another
Um,
good one.
and yeah, I mean, that's a, you know, just a fun way of thinking about, you know, like what are the games of the future, right? Like, you know, we were talking about education for students, but also like, you know, what are the games we play that actually instill the values of of a better, you know, materials management and resource management.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like this idea of games that we play to instill materials management. There was something that I had listened to. It was yet and again another CBC documentary, and it was a game that was created to teach the fundamentals of like mathematics to kids, and it had to do with like dragons. It had to do with like, I don't know, constructing a dragon or building a dragon or something like that. And you would learn step by step all these different things. And what you were learning were like some basics of math, I believe it was. But I thought it was really, really clever. And then there were some other educational things around how you might think about money in terms of a reverse bank, rather than, let's say, a credit card. You have these little piggy banks. Just digitized, done in a more data sciencey type of way. But yeah, that's interesting. We do some like solar punk stuff on the Discord, and we're working on this like ABCs of solar punk book, and there's been some other concepts that have run around that. But one thing that I really love, I love board games. I love those crazy complex board games that take 3 hours to set up, like Nemesis and stuff like that. These games have such complex gaming mechanics that I always thought it'd be really interesting to do a board game, a complex board game around the solar punk theme, teaching about like renewable energy and how to think about your resources and so on. And then just one last thing was, there is a video game I played a demo of on Steam called, I posted it on the Discord somewhere, but it's a solar punk video game. It's like a Sim City type of thing, and you have to reclaim land by building rivers that create hydro, that electric power, and turbines that you can then terraform barren land into useful stuff. So yeah, I'm feeling that there's this sentiment. How do we teach people at a young age about
Like,
these?
what are the
important
most
ideas?
common games to download? Like, you know, Animal Farm type thing, where like you have to like build your dynasty, or there's like the Storm the Castle games, right? Where, I mean, this is always what you see the ads for on your phone, right? Where there's like, you know, some army coming and you have to like build your defenses, and like that becomes sort of like the sort of implicit message there that you're defending against something. Personally, like I have a real struggle with video games because I don't want to go on some like Zelda quest, and you know, I typically get first in Mario Kart because I know how to go fast, and you know, I don't know what I want to play, like from the available suite of video games that are out there. I'm like, not, I want to learn something, right? Like I want to feel like playing a video game is like reading a book. Because when I read books, I get smarter. I don't just feel like I'm just like moving my fingers around for the sake of it. So it's a real challenge for me, because I would love to play video games more often than I do, because I know that it's a useful format.
Yeah, I love video games, but I just don't have the patience to play video games. But because I feel the same way, I want something that's going to be like educational. I want it to feed my brain and not become like a giant time suck. Yeah, so the game that I was talking about is called Terra Nil. And it's on Steam, and it's really chill, and it's very kind of like ASMR relaxy, but you start to get an idea of how to maximize the kind of terraforming of the land that you're in. And just adjacently to that, a game that I think Camille actually told me about that I fucking loved is the Stanley Parable. That was a bit of a mind fuck. Like it was awesome.
So, full disclosure, I worked in the games industry for 15 years. So if you have a few opinions, yeah, there's some great games out right now. Stray, Outer Wilds, Sable are all really, really good games, and are not just about shooting dudes in the head. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing that.
Can you, sorry, just can you put those in the Discord? I'm not even sure where they would go. Electronic Art, like we don't have a games channel, or just
Yeah, I can drop some in.
that'd be great because I'd
yeah,
love to go
Colorful
back to
channel?
those.
Keep it
Maybe I don't
themed?
know.
Yeah, I
Are
mean,
there
I think there's
solar
there's a
panels?
recommendations like books and media, like in that area there, because I posted Stray because I'm a big fan of Stray. I think that's
Where'd you post that?
it was in somewhere. There's a reference material section, and in there might be, I think there might be games.
Yeah.
Like, we're
Okay.
talking
Yeah,
board games
I'll
and
post
video
a
games.
bunch later today.
Cool, thank you.
But one of the interesting things is, so I had part of the reason I'm out in California and Oakland is because I had the chance to work with Will Wright on Spore, and it was really interesting to chat with him about Sim City and The Sims. And part of what inspired Sim City was this desire to understand a city as a system. And the Sims was actually inspired because his house was destroyed in the Berkeley Hills during the Berkeley Hills fire. And so basically his family had to flee and all their possessions were destroyed. And so he then wanted to create sort of a simulation of what is a house like. But it evolved into each object actually has a whole bunch of logic on how it interacts with other objects. And part of the genius of the design of the game is it means that it's not a top-down system. It's instead a simulation of all these various objects and how they interact with them. And part of the genius of that is that it means you can consistently and constantly add more stuff to the ecosystem and not worry about breaking the overall game. And there's been a lot of talk in the games industry over the last decade or two around using games for education, and edutainment fails almost 99% of the time because it comes in with a pedagogy of like, this is what must be taught. And often it loses the sort of the joy of exploration. And I would say games like Minecraft and Roblox have actually done an incredibly good job in getting kids to, and folks in general, to start to build and start to experiment with things. I think that the challenge, though, is that implicit in any game is you have to codify the systems. And it's really hard, especially when you get into complex or chaotic systems. It's really hard to make a game that is actually fun. Like trying like one of my like trying to make a game about getting legislation passed in like the United States Congress or even just at the local level, that the game would not be fun at all. Like people would never play it. But yet that's the kind of game that would actually help people understand the systems that exist. And the final point here is, and I know I've been talking for too long here, is part of the other challenge with games is they make systems legible. And there are a lot of systems of power, control, and influence in today's society that intentionally do not want to be legible
Hmm.
to most people. The hidden nature of those systems is what enables people to maintain control and power. And so therefore, if you were to make a game about like how do you do tax evasion for super yachts, like there are some people who really don't want that. Yeah, finance. Like this is one of those areas where I think if that there's a lot of language that gets coded. We're talking about finance, and like the movie The Big Short did a great job of deconstructing it in a way
One of
that,
my favorite movies. I can like watch it over and over again. It's the weirdest thing.
yeah, it's a wonderful movie. But that part of the goal of the finance industry, and not intentional or not, is the obfuscation of those systems. That if you actually make those systems legible, then potentially stuff goes off the rails and right quick.
closest film to Brad Pitt actually being Robert Redford.
Like it's another game could be like how to make a car dependent society. You know, like how do you strip out all of the train tracks and just make it hostile for people to be outside if they're not in a privately owned vehicle. I mean, to your point about changing legislation, I think that I'm kind of on a long journey there. In and around skateboarding and like that whole idea of like codifying the environment, right? Like how do you make a sidewalk that is better for skateboarding? Like that comes down to like question, when people talk about how livable a city is, they say, oh, it's bikeable and it's walkable. Well, there's no skatability framework, and so then skateboarding doesn't really function in the right way. Or like you could add a sort of a rumble strip at the edge of the intersection for the visually impaired that actually makes it harder to skateboard. Or you can give a city a walkability, or a neighborhood a walkability score of 99 because everything is in super close proximity, but that might not take into account like how big the expansion gaps are in the sidewalk that make it hostile or not to ride a skateboard down the street. So like the idea of codifying things and like whether or not you can actually do that in a game, I mean it kind of maybe speaks to why I don't really enjoy video games, because so much of like the worlds that I'm interested in seeing aren't codified yet. And so like that somebody could actually make a whole world. I mean, like the closest we have to a codified skateboardable world is like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but unfortunately like the skateboarding that I'm interested in is like I want to go to the grocery store. Like I want it to be as smooth to go to the grocery store as it is to ride through the airport. And I skate through the airport all the time, and when I do, people always look at me, they go, oh wow, that's a really good idea. I'm like, right, why am I the only person doing this? Like it is a more fun, less it's a more frictionless way to be in a space that everybody else is just like walking.
It's
Yeah,
interesting that you mentioned that. Well, one, I think Tony Hawk Pro Skater mashed up with Frogger would be a fun thing. I think the idea of like skateboarding as a proxy for accessibility is a great way to kind of think about it. A good friend of mine has muscular dystrophy, and so we talk a lot about accessible design in general. And I think that there are some things that are happening in societal culture, like adversarial architecture, designed specifically to make it hard to like skate down poles and do rail slides and loop-de-loops, whatever the tricks are on skateboards. Those pose impediments to people with accessibility issues.
Right. Well, and I mean, just to add to that a little bit, like a spectacle focused skateboarding that is about tricks is its own sort of problem there, because like the things that are difficult for people with MS are often like not having a place to sit down, right? And like it's not necessarily about like having massive gaps or anything like that. It could be like really mundane
curb cuts, right?
Say again.
Like curb cuts, like
right. Well, exactly. And like I would much prefer it if we didn't have right angle curves at all. I want to be able to get on and off the sidewalk at all times, and not have to ollie, right? Like the whole process of like jumping up the curb is like it's a risk prone movement, and like you have to have you have to be super skilled to get up and down the curb, jumping up and down it. But if you could just roll up and down the curb, then yeah, I mean, I think of skateboarding as a proxy for disability studies a lot, because like if you're in a wheelchair, it would be great if you could get up the sidewalk at all times and not have to go to the curb cut, right? Like to me, like the curb cut as sort of, it's like it's like at the top of a very, they think they've gotten to the top of the mountain when in fact there's like a much bigger mountain somewhere else, right? But like that would just be like a much more accessible sidewalk, generally speaking, not just
those like tiny wheels on skateboards can help identify pits, small little potholes in sidewalks, sewer grates, things that a wheelchair might have an issue rolling over. It's almost like you could indoctrinate a culture of like skateboard as a way of rapidly mapping accessibility of a city using sensors and probes, and everyone now knows if you see somebody just casually boarding somewhere, they're probably doing some kind of accessibility research, and then slowly get people accustomed to that, and then it just becomes commonplace, if not celebrated.
It's wild.
Caution, skateboarder at work.
yeah, this is stuff that I've like played with, like the idea of like adding accelerometers to skateboards so that like every time you hit a bump, that sort of stuff registers. If you were to able to map that with with Google Maps, and sort of like you
Yeah.
already pair existing massive data sets with with the stuff that is like intangible from photographs, right? Like you could walk down the street with 3D cameras and still not necessarily get the information that you might get when you roll a wheel over something.
Yeah.
And if you could sort of like pair those two things together, you end up like your 3D map and also then like your more acceleration, your map of like how things,
Well,
facilitate
could-
movement.
Yeah, you could do, I mean, elevation map of the city with a skateboard would be great because you know that it's a fixed distance between the board and the ground. So you could do elevation map beautifully. And then LiDAR, you could just 3D scan everything. You can get every single pothole and then just have some kind of a system figure out, oh, this is big enough that needs to be attended. But because it's probably because it's just a chip in the concrete, that could just be a guerrilla group of people who just go out and literally mix a cup of concrete and plop, 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 and it's fixed, right?
I've wondered about that. Like, how do you, because like for me, the process of like writing into the city to report a crack in the sidewalk is like too much, and like what any business will do is like they'll just spray paint the piece of sidewalk orange. And they're like,
Yeah.
cool, don't trip on it. And it's like, I'm sorry, like that for me, that's not actually a solution because I can't step over the crack. I am going to roll into the crack.
Mhm.
Do you know the term profilograph?
No.
So that, I mean, what you were describing there is effectively that. Like, so a profilograph basically, it provides a graph of the profile. So you can think of like the needle on a record player as a sort of profilograph, in as much as like what it does is it reads the surface and a profile graph.
Profile
Exactly.
graph, yeah.
Yep, exactly. And so then you could use a really fine needle or a dull needle depending on how scratched the record is. The type of skateboarding I do uses soft wheels because the actual built environment is full of a bunch of turbulence. And so if I actually want to get somewhere with any sort of degree of efficiency, I have to use soft wheels because it's not a skate park, it's not an airport. And I also want to be able to grip, right? Like I want to be able to lean into a turn and have the wheels not slip out.
Yeah, so kind of like having fat tires on a bike.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
it's a better vehicle. I mean, like when urethane first came out, people were like, wow, skateboarding is fun. And then suddenly, like 10 years later, we were back to hard wheels, as if they like that was the best solution, and it's not. But yeah,
Why did it go back to hard wheels?
for tricks.
Okay.
There's a great film, The Man Who Sold the World, and it's all about the skateboard company World Industries, and that like the sort of basically making skateboarding exclusively focused on just like who could do the best tricks and making products that broke intentionally. And it's just like you sort of just like watch skateboarding like go, you see the pictures of people riding in Central Park, right, all together, kids, adults, all that. Like that was sort of like what was happening in the late 60s, early 70s. And then suddenly it's like skateboarding is just sort of proto-fascism. It's just like a bunch of white dudes doing kickflips and like jumping off bigger and bigger things, and it's not actually that interesting anymore. But yeah, so I mean, I think basically that the vehicle was made to be able to slide across things, right? Like the harder the wheels, the easier it is to like slide across a ledge, or if you have like imperfect re-entry into a ramp, it's not going to grip up and send you the wrong direction. But something that's good for tricks is not necessarily good for just transit.
That's really interesting that there's such a manifestly different model of skating that could be available, but that it's like fundamentally doesn't market as well because the tricks is the marketing. And so it means that skating writ large has been pulled into this increasingly antisocial, more spectacular kind of medium as a consequence of it simply being able to be sold. Again, means that finding sort of alternative ways of marketing it in that broader sense would be necessary to provide a countervailing force. One of the other things you were talking about with games, and it's a shame we lost Justin, but I think he'd agree, is that games always provide this kind of tension between a system and a narrative structure that they sort of put the system within. And I detest the narrative structures that most games kind of reside within, particularly because of the disconnect between the system that they sort of present. And it's been funny playing a couple of different games. Minecraft in this game Icarus that my friend on the Discord wrote as well, and it's talking about the disconnect between the richness of the visual system that's sort of can be facilitated within Unreal Engine versus the richness of what it is that you actually do. When you have a stick, it looks like a stick. You cut it off of a tree and it's something. But the sort of the system per se that you have to manipulate and to be able to change properties of those sticks is vastly much more limited. And yeah, like that's a shame because it means that people have kind of gone for visual immersiveness rather than systematic immersiveness. But yeah, it is very hard to engineer, and we barely have a language for being able to explain why, like, the richness of a system is at least as useful a target as the so-called visual fidelity that most people have kind of gotten into from the perspective of sort of cinema and other things.
Yeah, with
Well,
games.
also,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to jump back to skateboarding. I was going to say, like, it's a lot harder learning how to skateboard as an adult without any sort of former experience. Like, so in some ways, I feel like, and maybe this is culturally, or maybe this is just like safety, healthcare concerns in terms of like, fuck, what if I fall and break my knee? I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't been leveraged as a tool for accessibility, just because the market that it appeals to is not generally a market that's thinking long term or necessarily thinking about accessibility, right? And like the people who are maybe thinking about accessibility later are not keen to learn skateboarding because it's a lot harder to learn as an adult.
Yeah, I mean,
As someone who's tried learning skateboarding as an adult.
Yeah. I've been like, I tried to use a longboard for a while to like commute because it like does the last mile problem like really well. But I fell like in a very public area and I was just like, never again. And I'm just.
I think, I mean, both of what you're saying is exactly right. Like skateboarding as it markets itself as a high failure to success ratio activity, and like the form factor definitely like predisposes people to injury, and the environment that it operates in predisposes people to injury, and like it markets itself, towards men, towards white men, towards young white men, right? It's like people who have the time and the privilege to be able to get hurt, and like what is it in a world where like it isn't that, right? We're like, what is the skateboarding that's marketed towards like low failure to success ratio, like that doesn't have you falling in public on the way to things, that like champions helmet use as a starting point, as opposed to saying like, oh, it's way cooler if you do it without pads, or where like the skate park is not full of massive obstacles and maybe actually is like surrounded with just sort of like some of the realities of the built environment, like cracks in the sidewalk and stuff like that, where like you kind of just learn how to push over imperfections, and it's like it's not particularly interesting, but it's like the fidelity of the stick, right? Like are we talking about doing kickflips, or are we talking about like successfully getting up and down the curb?
It just, as you guys are talking, I just keep looking up at these photos I took years ago.
Right. Well, and like those are a great example. Like, so skateboarding is getting more accessible in as
So
much
much
as like
fun.
there is a more diverse group of people doing radical things. Like there are a lot of queer people and women doing epic tricks, but like I don't see more people pushing to the store. And so like I think that there's sort of like this perverse incentive right now where like we do have like more, sort of there's more different types of people doing visually impressive things, but like that, like just because they're, can be like a gay skater of the year or like a woman skater of the year, it doesn't mean it's any easier for you, Tiffany, or you, to like skate to where you want to go. And
So
so
proud of this. Look at that.
it's great. I mean, yeah, Julian, when I saw that you had made those things, I was sort of like, it highlights it like it's a success in a very particular area, right? Like the sort of the access for women and queer folks into like the space of the spectacle is different than an actually more accessible environment, or more accessible skateboarding.
To be successfully mundane with like
Exactly.
skating.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, those guys operate at a, I mean, Lizzie was like Birdhouse's first women's pro deck. It's a totally different level. It's not
Right. She's
like
incredible.
what you're saying.
Yeah. For what's worth, Camille, if you want to learn how to skate, I live in San Francisco and teach skateboarding. So more than happy to help.
What a shame. I just moved from the Bay Area in August.
Oh,
But I've gotten really into roller skating.
good.
So, that felt more accessible with the 2 feet because then balance is less an issue. And there are similar kind of considerations in terms of like cracks in the sidewalk and accessibility and stuff. But like I feel safer on a pair of rollerblades or roller skates just because, the like more locus of control with the 2 feet versus the, 2 feet touching the ground separate versus having them sort of tied together in any way.
Hmm.
So I guess that's kind of, I feel like the more accessible entry point for, people who are older. Plus it's something you can do like communally easily in public spaces and it doesn't feel like there's as much of a barrier to entry culturally. Like I've gone to some skate parks near me and to roller skate because, I'm looking for like flat, shiny concrete, and it'll just be like a group of teenage boys all on fucking skateboards, dropping into bowls and stuff. It's like, wow, it's a very intimidating environment for an adult. I'm glad I'm like using a completely different tool set that's sort of tangential, but not like, oh man, like
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I've been thinking about like what an accessible skate park would look like, and like what does a skate park look like that's full of women and children, and like it's just it's a different space completely.
Every once in a while, I see a video on YouTube, and it's always like some kids doing tricks, and some like security guard or some Karen type of character that freaks out on them and sometimes physically attacks them. And I get that yeah, it might make noise, but no more noise than what you would normally get in a city. With delivery trucks and stuff going around. But also at the same time, it's like I don't know what the history of skateboarding is and how it got that stigma as being like a bad thing, but it's like these are like kids getting exercise, right? It's like they're doing like a physical activity, they're getting exercise, they're doing stuff. And I always wonder about how is that not being discussed? Like what all the positives that actual skateboarding is, even with the tricks and stuff. So I don't know what the history. I don't know what comic book or band or whatever made skateboard. If it was Suicidal Tendencies or something made a video that made everybody think skateboarders were bad. I don't know what's going on there.
I mean, I think part of it is like that sort of spectacle production is the mainstream of skateboarding, when like the true mainstream of skateboarding should probably be like commuters and
agreed. But I think that the mainstream skateboarding, that's unfortunately that's what the mainstream is now. But it's like, to me, it's like it's the gateway. Is it really a gateway? Now people aren't really thinking about it as a commuter thing.
Right, like there are cyclists, and then there are people who ride bicycles,
BMX,
and
then there's
tricks. There are a lot of people who just want to ride a bike to work, right? Most people who ride bikes are not out there doing like bar flips or riding 100 miles or
popping wheelies.
Yeah, they're not doing any of that. They're riding a bike.
Those things those cool kids do.
But the skateboard that you use to do kickflips with and stuff like that is not fun to push around on.
Yeah.
And to Tiffany's point, like what she called the longboard, like all like
I've got friends who do longboard.
Between a skateboard and a longboard is that it has soft wheels, but like the mainstream of skateboarding has successfully sort of like othered soft wheel skateboarding to the point where it's a longboard.
Yeah.
And it's not but the skateboards that I make are the same size as normal skateboards. They just have soft wheels. And so like there's the form factor is literally just that people that it's got soft wheels, but I like will skate down the street and people who ride hard wheels won't make eye contact with me. There's this weird sort of social delineation that's completely unnecessary, but you can sort of see like the politics playing out in the way that those like social lines even draw themselves.
It's like a skateboard hierarchy. I just think it's like I drive like a pickup truck. I feel like I should be doing like the pickup truck wave to every other pickup truck driver, but it's only Tacoma people that I can do that with. I can't do that with a Ford guy. They won't even look at me.
Yeah, the identity politics of what is and is not allowed to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. What's your skateboard company?
It's called Comet Skateboards.
Comet?
Yeah, COMET.
Cool.
that's like, the shorthand is founded in 1997. It's one of the first B Corps. I'm not the original founder. I'm sort of the second generation person operating it. But it was like, it started because the guy who founded it went to school for materials management, and basically either had the option of getting into policy or getting into manufacturing, and skateboarding was a way to sort of access material flows, everything from metal to wood to any number of other things, and sort of like be able to sort of do, basically like do near future stuff, right? Like thinking about how you could make existing commodities better, so he was a part of like designing the cradle. He's friends with the person who came up with the cradle to cradle certification, B Corp network, all of that stuff. And so like sort of trying to make manifest, better material flows in the form of real products.
And then how did you get kind of pulled into that?
So I started as a journalist in skateboarding, like out of high school, was photographing and writing and designing, and like ended up getting a job as an editor. Somebody like was starting a downhill skateboarding magazine and asked me to be the editor. So I started doing that, and then just like started skating with the team that was in San Francisco. Went to school.
When are we talking about roughly?
Let's see. So I'm born in 92. So I was like skating in San Francisco in like the early 2000s. So, like, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12 was like when I guess I was the editor of this magazine in like 2011 for about a year and a half.
Got it.
And then let's see, I went to college in New York, and the company had moved to New York to get closer to the supply of Canadian maple, as sort of like, one of the, green things, like, well, why are we sending Canadian maple from, the East Coast of Canada all the way out to San Francisco to press it into stuff? Like, let's move the company closer to the supply chain, so that we can actually do that. So it moved to the East Coast. And then I went to school in New York, and they were holding these events like the Ithaca Skate Jam, where they close down a block of the street and have like a, basically like a skate like block party. And so
Yeah.
I was going up, and I met the owner, and then whatever year at the last one of those that they did in 2017, I pulled one of their old skateboards out of a pile. It was like this sort of cruiser skateboard, very like, like narrow, but about the same size as a normal skateboard. And I would like push it around town in New York, and then I would also take it to the mountains that we would skate down, and I could ride it just as easily. I could ride the same setup through town as I could down mountains, and sort of stumbled upon like a form factor and a setup that was just good in basically every environment. And like shared it with my friends and stuff like that, and they were all like, yeah, this is great. Like, I haven't ridden a better skateboard than this. And I had this moment. I was in Portland with a friend, and she had started skating when she was 35, and her boyfriend sort of tried to start skating with her, but he just like couldn't really get the hang of it. He just he didn't really care about skateboarding in the way that she did. Like, she got into it and really wanted to do it, so she took some classes and learned how to do it. And then we were in like the school parking lot across the street from her house, and he rode this skateboard that I had put together, and it was like, this is easier than any board that I've ridden to ride, like more intuitive, just like better set up. And so like in that moment, I already had Jason's phone number, who's the original founder, and I just called him. I was like, hey, I think I want to make these boards. And he's like, cool, we have the stuff, we have the presses, come up and make them. And so I called a friend who knows how to make composites and stuff like that. And we put together a little team and went up to Ithaca and pressed the stuff, pressed like 45 of the boards. And while I was there, Jason said to me, hey, if you want to come in and run the company, you can run it.
It's amazing. It's beautiful. Sorry, did we
That's
already
great.
talk about this? What in Ithaca? Where did you go to school?
I went to school at NYU, but Jason went to Cornell.
Okay, got it. That's my alma mater.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I mean, you should, I don't know how old you are, but you two may have been there at the same time.
I can. I'm trying to imagine downhilling some of those hills in Ithaca.
Mhm.
It's pretty. From what I remember, just the cold morning. Not cold, like shit cold.
Yep.
Just
So-
snowed mornings trying to get to campus.
Buffalo Street was one of the ones that we shut down.
Buffalo Street. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty steep out there. But that's the fun stuff. Like, with
Right.
soft wheels, you can drift in a way that allows you to actually do real speed management, right? Like, whereas like hard wheels just have to go straight down, because as soon as they're drifting, it slips out. With the soft wheels, you have a little bit more resistance, and so it
Right.
becomes sort of a.
That's cool.
Anyways, but
Love
yeah,
it.
the skateboard
I love
thing is.
I'm looking at the site now. I love the Comet's Path story. I'm gonna give that a good proper read, but I just like this forever scrolling, continue with the story and the illustration. That looks really nice. And the orbiter is, I'm just like something special about that. What's that thing on the front? I don't know if I understand that.
It's a foot stop. So
Oh, it's a
like,
foot stop. Got it.
when you're going real fast and you're drifting, it's just nice to have your foot secured on the board. Like that board's for going 60 miles an hour.
Okay, this is a serious board. It's a nice, it's a really nice looking board.
Thanks. Yeah, it's,
They're-
I mean, it's, you know,
They're
for me,
all
like,
nice looking.
the skateboarding has sort of become a way to like, it's just a way to think about everything. It's like, and I'm sure in much the way like the near future sort of framework becomes sort of a way to like think about everything. It's, you know, everything could be made better for skateboarding, and like the sort of general
Yeah.
like thesis is that a skatable society, like you were saying, is a thriving society. Like if it's if you're more able
Yeah.
to skate through space, it's a better space for everybody.
As an
So
object, it's beautiful. I feel like
Yeah,
I'm
they're
gonna have to
great.
have one just
just
even
hang. Yeah.
even if it's not gonna. Is that a violation if I say like I'm gonna get a board, but I'm not gonna? I might not ride
Yeah,
it.
that's fine. They're meant to
Just
be nice design
because
objects.
you know, I don't know. So far, I haven't broken a bone. Want to
It's a
keep it
tool, not a jewel, Julian.
that way. I know. I know. Yeah, you can't buy that. You can't buy a Makita saber saw if you're not gonna use it. Just hang on your wall. What's wrong with you, man?
What I'm just looking at the construction of some of the boards. Like I'm looking at the cruiser, and it like that one doesn't look like, it doesn't appear that it's made of plywood. Is it made of plywood?
It's vertically laminated, so you take like you take
Yeah.
a big block of wood and then you cut slices out of it.
Yeah,
and then you
okay.
make a floor.
Yeah, so yeah, I was going to say it looks like it's laminated planks and not ply that you would normally see in a board, and that offers the strength that you need,
So that one's got fiberglass.
and that's done in fiberglass.
Well, so it's like got a fiberglass top and bottom. It's like a
Got it.
snowboard has a core, you know, and then it's got
Got it.
composite on the top and bottom of it.
Nice.
That's the one that I pulled out of a pile.
Yeah. And is that CNC'd or is that pressed?
Both.
Both. Okay, got it. So you
Like-
press it and then you CNC the
Press the
parts.
core,
Yeah.
CNC the core to put the wheel wells in, and then you like put the fiberglass in, put it in a press, get it, you know, mold it the right way, and then you put it back on a jig and you cut it out, and
That's cool.
that's
Yeah, I'm obsessed with like maker videos on YouTube. I just like seeing how everything is made.
mhm.
So it's like, yeah, I'll probably start looking at like making of skateboards.
Okay.
And that'll be tonight.
Yeah, the you know, trying to find a way to like use skateboarding to talk about a better way of living in the world is sort of like,
Yeah.
that's the charter for this. So, and like, you know, that Comet's Path page is sort of like the first pass of it, because a lot of what's in those pictures doesn't exist in the world necessarily, right? Like we didn't have pictures of those things when we made that page, right? Like I didn't have pictures of
Mhm.
people teaching little girls how to skate or anything like that. We do that now, like we do elementary school programming and stuff like that, and it's going well. Kids learn.
That's cool. There you go. Big ideas on small wheels, right?
Mhm, mhm. Sorry, I sort of like hijacked this with skateboard conversation.
No,
I don't mean
This
to.
is what it's all about.
Okay.
Whatever, I hijacked the whole beginning of the conversation, so it's all good. We all get our turn to hijack. That's how it works here, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, so I
By
mean,
any chance,
Yeah.
do you have any do you know anyone who teaches like skateboarding, but like for commuting kind of purposes in Toronto?
yeah,
By any chance?
I do. I absolutely do. One of our academic researcher goes to school in Toronto, and he's sort of helping us to design these curriculums and stuff. Yeah, I'll put you two in touch.
Yes, thank you.
And
That's
like
awesome.
for what it's worth, like we focus on skateboarding for transportation. Like the curriculum that we're developing is specifically for that. If you want to learn,
Yes.
like I couldn't teach you to kickflip if I try. I can do a kickflip in theory, you know. But I've never actually landed one. It's not like, and I've been skating since I was 13. It's just not important for what I do on a skateboard.
Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted skateboarding to be for me back when I like tried to do it, and doing it alone was not working.
Cool. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I have people. There's an amazing crew of people in Toronto that are super nice, very welcoming, love beginners. So
Awesome.
got you covered.
Exciting.
Dre, to your point about like putting sensors on a skateboard, I mean, it is something that I'm sort of like actively looking for people to help with.
Mhm.
Where I'm submitting a grant today for like some carbon fiber reclamation, for like to turn like used carbon fiber into skateboards. It's like turning a waste stream into like a competitor for penny. Because like that cruiser board that we have on our website is $325, or at least will be once we sort of appropriately adjust all of our pricing, and like that puts it outside the reach of like the low income people for whom skateboarding could be really transformative. So making an equivalent product from a waste stream is a way for us to sort of like reduce the costs without necessarily outsourcing to like injection molded plastic in China.
Yeah.
Um,
It's okay. A couple of thoughts around that. So are you familiar with the Precious Plastics project?
no.
Look up Precious Plastics on, it used to be YouTube, but they're probably Precious
They have like a
Plastic.
really
Yeah.
well
.com.
developed website with like kind
Yeah.
of different areas where
Yeah.
they're doing different sort of types of recycling manufacturing. I had a friend who was one of their residents
Yeah. So
actually for like shredding plastic.
yeah, like basically this is some guy a bunch of years ago that basically developed plans for an entire open source system for shredding plastic, melting plastic, injecting plastic. And there was a YouTube channel called Precious Plastic. Now there's preciousplastic.com, and it's turned into an actual thing. So a few years back, a buddy of mine moved to Hawaii, and we were talking about doing this thing where we would ask kids to go and collect plastic off of the beach, because Hawaii's got this terrible problem where all this like plastic from America comes washing onto their beaches. So collect all the plastic, figure out what the low density, high density stuff is, and then melt all the thermoplastic, and then press them into sunglasses, and then sell it back to America, or to mainlanders when they come to visit, so take it back to the United States as a pair of sunglasses. But what we would do is we would pay the kids, like, you bring us a pound of plastic and we're going to pay you a little bit of money for that. So we get kids activated to do this, and then all the proceeds go into building another precious plastics in a shipping container, and then replicate it over and over and over again, is try to have one in every school so that all the beaches are covered. So when I think of that as a prototype idea that we had, and for how that might, like for a low income community, where it's like, yeah, you know what, you could just have a plastic drop off area where all your low density polyethylene bottle caps get collected and then shredded and turned into this. And then another thing, there's I really like disc golf, and there's a guy on YouTube who has been using the Precious Plastics system, creating his own open sourced plastic mold injection system to make disc golf discs out of reclaimed plastic. So that's been something else I've been following a lot. So that's that. I just wanted to throw that in your direction while you're thinking about that. And then as far as sensors go, I've got a few creative technologists, people that I've done a lot of work with in the past. Like I've done a lot of weird sensor and actuator based things for doing stunts.
Oh,
and so
okay.
So I've got some friends who are really well versed in sensor type of stuff. So my friend Brent specifically, I could probably just sit down with a beer for him with him in one evening, and we could probably jam out a shit ton of different ideas. He'd be like, oh no, this is the technology that you would use to make it. And he would send me the Arduino library that probably currently exists on GitHub somewhere. And
a lot of that stuff is, I mean, I'd be happy to contribute as well, you know, at some level. I mean, a lot of the basic sensor platform that I designed for Amada is pretty generic, you know, in terms of, okay, you have an MCU, and you've got, you know, now it's all fully integrated. So you just get the MEMS chip that's got the 3-axis accelerometer, it's got a gyro, it's got, you know, everything that you basically need. Those things are, they're commodity now.
yeah,
That's the relatively easy part. Then the part is like, okay, so how do you do all the what do you do with the data? How do you
Right,
refine the
exactly.
data on the other end so that you're actually getting something useful? And what's noise and what's actually you hit a bump?
Hmm.
Those things are where it gets fun.
And I mean, I can think of a couple different applications. Like, the first one is you want to design the most accessible skateboard possible, right? So it's like thinking of, you could, well, to me, you want to figure out like what changes you could make to the form factor to make it such that people would be less likely to fall off. So, I can imagine accelerometers like on the front wheels and the back wheels and on the body. So you have this sort of triangle. So it's like, okay, the first wheel hits a bump, the second wheel hits a bump, and like how far does the body go, past the front wheels and back wheels? Like, to what degree are you made unstable by the size of any particular bump? And
Yeah.
can you change, say, the size of the wheels on the skateboard or how far the wheels are apart from one another, such that you actually sort of like map out, the most sort of stable while also still fun skateboard available. So that's one way, but then that's like in a prototyping space, right? That's for the design of something such that you end up with a product that the way that we're talking about molding these things, like the molds are $20,000, right? So you don't want to keep iterating over and over and over. You want to like have the ideal skateboard or close to it from the jump, and then just move on from there. But the other sort of useful idea here is to actually make to map the space, right? To provide a data stream to municipalities such that they actually improve their environment. So if you could have like an opt-in kind of thing, like, oh, you could get this skateboard, with or without sensors, and if you get it with sensors, you're sort of opting into sort of providing anonymous data to do exactly what you were saying. Like, the people are out here basically just like doing mapping of the space to try to improve the built environment.
Yeah, totally get it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and you could do all the data on the Helium network as well. That's a big network that has massive coverage. I did a Helium based project a little while ago, and even in Toronto, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, and in somewhere like San Francisco and Oakland, it's just fully covered. But yeah, Helium is a long range radio frequency, so similar to like a cell phone data frequency, but it's long range. And I have a Helium antenna on my house, so I contribute to the network, and most it means every neighborhood in the world nowadays in any major city is almost fully covered. But it's really inexpensive to transfer data on there, and it's real time. So you could opt into a system using Helium where you're sharing anonymous data, but you might have access to your own data, so that you could do a where's my skateboard feature.
Mm-hmm.
If it ever got stolen, or if you ever wanted to map your skateboard data to Google Earth or to Strava or something like that, it would just be a one click, like just dump your data into a CSV and send it to the to the API or something like that.
Right, like contributing like your smoothest routes and stuff like that. I mean, it would be great to sort of be like, okay, what's the smoothest way through the city?
CTF.
Basically it's sort of like service quality maps. So it's like, because there are like, you can get bike routes through the city, right? Like you get sort of there's the green if there's a bike lane, there's the dash green if it's sort of bikeable.
Yeah.
If there was sort of a similar filter for skateboarding where it's like, okay, cool, these are the best sidewalks, and
Yeah. And then that could just be community validated, right?
Right.
Somebody would say, hey, this was a great ride. This is a great way to get from the East End to downtown core. I'm gonna flag this as a really good ride, or I'm gonna flag this one like, oh, except for this one part here. Because there's a lot of really good data visualization that you do that. And you could also you could tie in with open data. I did a project where I tied in with the Toronto open data to figure out what the most dangerous bicycle intersection was, and specifically found the intersection, and specifically found that its left turns onto that street, so we could identify exactly what the bike/car maneuver was that caused the accidents.
Yep.
So stuff like that with skateboarding, starting to track that when you get more and more commuters out there.
I'd love
building
to
that
be able
data
to,
set.
to put them on the kids I'm teaching, because I'm teaching like 1st through 5th graders, and to be able to
Mhm.
actually track the difference, like, you know, how the skateboard moves differently across the span of their learning curve. So like, what is the skateboard doing as they're learning, right? And like, you know, multiple weeks into their learning activity, like how, you know, what is the sort of quantifiable difference in the way that they move once they're sort of getting more comfortable.
Mhm.
But I used to work at Boosted for a little while, that skateboard company that went under.
Yeah.
Um,
Casey
and
Neistat
yeah,
promoted
exactly.
skateboard.
I was just a copywriter there, but
Yeah.
I like helped them with their launch of their last round of boards before they tanked. And they weren't skateboarders. You know, they were like, and they were trying to use an electrified thing to deliver a value proposition that's actually just like better done by a good soft wheel skateboard.
Mhm.
I was working there at like the same time that I was getting, you know, being handed the keys to Comet. So it was sort of like weird to watch this multi-million-dollar organization just completely fuck it up. While
Yeah,
like,
it's too bad.
it just could have been so much better, but like it doesn't need to be a $1,500 skateboard, and a motorized skateboard is not a good form factor. Like it's, you know, if you're going to put a motor on something, you need to be able to hold on to it.
Mhm.
But sorry, my point in bringing it up was that they had data, obviously, because it was like, you know, Bluetooth connected to the device, you would connect it to your phone, you could see how many miles you had ridden and all this stuff. Like they sort of had done.
The data play.
Yeah,
The data
exactly.
play.
Exactly. Like it was, you know, you could get all that and you could find your board if it had been lost and things like that. But it wasn't it wasn't being used to like the best of its capabilities, right?
Right. Yeah.
It definitely,
Hey,
yeah.
sorry. Just to kind of go a meta level up. Is this like, is it worth um is it worth also having this conversation in a channel? Like, do we need to spin up a channel?
Oh man, if we could have a skateboarding specific channel, like that'd be sweet. If this is something that people are interested in, like thinking
I
of it,
mean, I think like Dre
What
and I
about if we
are.
made it, I'm interested too, but what about if instead of exclusive to skateboards, what about if we made it sort of last mile, right? So it could be
yeah,
inclusive of like skateboards, you know, electric unicycles, scooters, like
that'd
just
be
make
cool.
it a little bit wider, just so it's not sort of hyper specific, because there may be some kind of interesting cross-platform lessons, I
Yeah,
guess.
no,
Yeah.
I'm really interested in that. I'm also really interested in what sort of other technical and technological infrastructure can be better supportive, like Apple
That's the
Maps,
stuff I'm
like
kind of
what.
interested in too. Also, you know, if they're sorry, Brett, it was just to add to it, like if there's a um there's the meta stuff, but then I think also nerding out on these different sensor platforms and thinking
Mhm,
about how
mhm.
you start from that level of materiality to channel into these things, because I think we could have like really fruitful conversations about civics and the discourse and the nature of cities and that kind of stuff, but then to actually start from actually building something, you
Yeah,
know, like even just like, thanks for sharing the Adafruit thing. Of course Adafruit's gonna have
Yeah.
already got it
Exactly.
built kind of thing. But just even starting with that, like, hey, you know, let's see what happens. And we got, you know, Aaron, so you've got the platform, and like I would in a second I would buy like a couple of these and start tinkering around and say like, hey, take this, see what happens if you velcro this to one of your decks, and what do we then, what starts happening? And then the helium network stuff, I mean, that'd be off the hook
Yeah,
if
it would be
you
crazy.
know, kind of tied into this other thing where it's the network that's still looking for a reason in a way.
Yeah.
Not really, but kind of.
Yeah, they're still kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I'm dealing specifically with people at Helium on stuff, and they're looking for there's opportunity to get grants for projects like this. I even something as simple like, you know, I've got like I've got a millimeter accurate ultrasonic sensor sitting in my basement that just throw that on our Arduino and calibrate it, and you'll get millimeter accurate, and just tie it to a Google Map coordinate, done. Like that thing could be, that's a weekend project to make that thing happen.
And then all the LiDAR stuff, like someone's got to
Yeah.
have like LiDAR-y kinds of, oh, attach this to your Arduino. It's a LiDAR, you know?
Yeah.
I don't
I mean,
know.
you could just
Randall
put
probably tell me like you're crazy.
just use your
but,
phone, just like put an iPhone attachment and just turn on your phone and use that to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, you can use IMUs to do impact sensing, so that if you're hurt, then the same way that, like, you know, Apple recently had the high G IMU kind of stuff, like that kind of thing would be really cool to have as peace of mind. One of the other things I was thinking about when within the context of it is climate, like being able to do CO2 and carbon monoxide sensing, and having that sort of real time would be really interesting from the benefit of a city to know the sort of the state of it. And yeah, just thinking about like Lufthansa, really, last time I flew Lufthansa was like '06, something like that. They were touting hard the sensor platform and the sort of the benefit of society of flying these planes around in different spaces. And so like just finding out what are useful things that cities might want to know about themselves would be really cool. I mean, obviously it should be benefit primarily the person who buys the board, who does the skating, but knowing that there's a whole world of information that could be beneficial to the people in it would be cool. And changing things like being able to track over time, or have sort of representations of certainty of conditions could also incentivize people to kind of discover and explore things. So there are lots of really amazing opportunities there.
It's a good point. Like skate parks tend to be built in like high emissions areas. Whereas like tennis courts and basketball courts abound. Like I'll send in a presentation that a friend put together, but like skate parks typically go in bad spots, and if they were put in better spots, it would be better for everybody. Julian is near the Venice skate park, which is like a high foot traffic area. It's brings people from all around. The skate parks in San Francisco are in sort of like less desirable areas and don't tend to get a lot of traffic from other folks. So thinking of these as sort of like mutual aid spaces is really an interesting idea. And so I guess two ideas to respond to your point about the falling. I think that's great. Like in a world where like your phone is one of the sensors, and then you've also got two on the skateboard. As soon as like the phone leaves the space of the skateboard, like you could say, like are you hurt? Like you could actually identify falls, right? Like so you could sort of build in some safety mechanisms for people. And then to Camille's point about like wheeled access, generally speaking, like I co-sign that 100%. Like scooters, roller skates, all like wheelchairs, definitely, like all of that stuff is really important. And I mean, I'm interested in designing like a better the yellow dots at the intersection. I don't know, I never know what to call them. I always call them rumble strips, but like those things that are there for the visually impaired, those are terrible for scooters, roller skates, skateboards. Like they're effectively skate stoppers. And so like because when you roll over them, you get sort of the experience, which like slows you down really fast. And unless you're proficient and prepared to ride over them, they're pretty bad. And it's one of those things where like that's an injection molded part made by like a very small number of manufacturers that's sold all around the country, and like designing a better version of that still met ADA compliance but was also good for wheeled access would have implications nationwide. It's one of like the few sort of like leverage points that I've thought of that would actually be like really worthwhile on the level of like the entire society, as opposed to just on the level of the individual who rode the skateboard.
Truncated domes is the name of them. It seems having one axis that's a little bit longer so that they're not quite as sharp on that incline could be really beneficial, and a pretty subtle change that may not have a textural difference. In the context of like I mentioned Apple Maps, I'm really interested in one, obviously, like so Apple Maps now has bikeability, like it has, you can choose a bike route, and I'm curious, are there maps of places and how skatable they are? Are there sort of circumstances or sets of conditions that you can repeatedly say that means that this is by definition like more skatable, or is it something that you need to have sort of manually mapped? I'm thinking about like if for one thing, like, so it might be the case that maps like on Google Maps, Apple Maps, like skating is too specific, but it would be interesting to think about like what would it look like to have the individuals be able to subscribe to bikeability or skateability or scootability or any of these different things, like these modes. Like what is the data that you would need to have about the sort of the conditions in a place, either sort of permanently in terms of the actual physical infrastructure that's durable, or temporarily to designate them as sort of skatable routes and stuff like that. Like what is a mapping solution for you and your needs?
Back to that idea of like the profilograph, like thinking of surface quality. So like just 4 examples. Okay, airport, right, which is like a polished surface, is going to have a very, very low signal, right? like imagining a sensor, like there'll be like a low level of disturbance. The sort of other end of that would be like skating over brick or over wood slats, right? Where it's like the whole time. That's a not a very scalable, or those, what do you call those, the dots, right? Like that would be,
Yeah, truncated domes.
yeah, that would be an example of a very unskatable surface, because imagine trying to accelerate over it, turn over it, right? It's like, so if the two ends of the spectrum are the truncated dots and an airport, you know, in between that you have wood slats, brick, you've got asphalt, right? So any amount of like road, if it's you know, seen a lot of snow, like wear from snow, like Boulder, Colorado, I used to live there, like, you know, the snow damage on the asphalt makes the aggregate rather exposed, and so you still end up with like a high level of vibration. You know, whereas like if you have like a fresh piece of asphalt, it's, you know, more akin to the airport. And then like with a sidewalk, right, like the size of the expansion gaps, right, like both like whether or not the sidewalk, the surface of the sidewalk is like raised in any given way, right, like if you have a crack, that's, you know, a disturbance, but also like the size of the expansion gap is important, and also how close or far apart they are from one another, right, because you end up with like a like that's the sound that you sort of, that you get from when, you know, you get the first set of wheels rides over and then the second set of wheels rides over. So there's probably an ideal spacing for expansion gaps that that allows, you know, for the appropriate sort of you know, speed, right? Like, so that, like, because if the expansion gaps are too close, they'll slow you down. So thinking of like, you know, it's sort of like on the level of the micro texture, that's, you know, that's where you would get the most skatability. And I mean, of course, then there's like hills, you know, like pushing up a hill is not that fun. I don't mind walking up hills personally, and I like skating down hills because the boards that I use are good for doing it. But it's also great if you have a helmet and gloves. You know what I mean? There's various, like you could put sensors in. We use these gloves with pucks on them, so that you can like put your hand down as a way to, you know, you can sort of rotate the board out in front of you and use it as a braking mechanism. So you could, you know, you could do that on hills and be like, okay, cool. How many times did you have to slow down on the hill and stuff like that? I mean, there's so many different things that you could measure that would be a lot of fun. But I would, you know, the first and easiest one is just the surface quality of any given space, the road, the sidewalk, etc. And then, I mean, the other.
Does anybody have anything like that out? No.
Oh no. The
For no spaces. There's no map.
No, I mean, there's skate park maps, like where you can go, like, you know, there's things like, oh, there's a skate park over here, or like this, you know, ledge is particularly grindable or whatever. But like skateboarding as a culture just has not focused on this basically at all. It's just not in the purview of mainstream skateboarding. And like, you know, the downhill skateboarding community is interested in it, but doesn't know that it's interested in it. Right, like it loves spaces where it can go fast and do drifts, but it's not focused specifically on like, oh, what is an accessible space to ride a skateboard in. It's just like it's looking for a safe closed road environment to go fast and do drifts. Nobody has actually taken like the urbanism approach to skateboarding and like the livable city approach to skateboarding and said like this is a useful tool for thinking about, and like skatability as a useful tool for thinking about how accessible a space is. That it's a completely untouched space, which is why I'm in it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a fun place to be.
Yeah, I wouldn't just like run a skateboard widget company. I've like no interest in just being like a manufacturer of things. Really, it doesn't sound that fun.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like the sort of skatability mapping as a project that can be kind of bought into for individuals to be like what kind of system it would need from a sensing platform sort of context, and what kind of jobs you'd like people to be able to do, and what could be offered for a city as a consequence of a sort of an ardently comprehensive map of the scalability of it, being able to kind of grow what's known and knowable, and the way that it can change how people understand skating in a space. Well, if you can find a small town that's sort of more amenable to skating, and then pilot with it essentially to be like, here's what happens when people know how to skate a place. Here's what happens to the sort of desirability of those spaces and the social context of skating, you can see some really interesting things happening with it, and it's really cool to think about where the sort of the technicals can sort of act in support of some of those other social and like quite pro-social sort of outcomes.
Right. I've been starting to dig into that. And I mean, I think San Francisco is a great place to do it because there is a lot of support for this sort of stuff. I've been doing like getting the institutional relationship set up with like the Bicycle Coalition, with Walk SF, with Livable City. These are each sort of like different people who are interested in these sort of pro-social ideas, but don't necessarily have the whole picture. And like I said, my sort of ethos, or like the thesis is that if they could include skateboarding, that they would actually be more likely to achieve their goals. I mean, I think that for cities, there's a lot of money getting made available through the IRA that just got passed for making your spaces, more accessible. And if you could actually provide a design for a sidewalk that was, going to be more accessible, you could say, okay, cool, like here's your capital. It's a capital project, right? Like you have to actually go in and redesign the sidewalk or extend it in some way. But if you could make it better, if you could make a better bike lane, things like that, you could say like, cool, like you invest X number of millions of dollars to, try it on one block and see if it improves it. And then, do it for all of Valencia Street. And then, see if you actually get more traffic on it. I mean, and, things like safe routes to school, this is sort of the other, like, because we're doing teaching in schools, I think that like probably the immediate area where you would want to make this the most implemented is around schools, right? Like you want parents to feel like they can drop their kids off, 1 block, 2 block, 10 blocks away from the school and know that there is sort of an infrastructure in place that the kids can get to school safely. And like you can't drop your kids off with a bike. Like you either bike from home or you don't bike at all, right? You don't drop your kid off, 10 blocks from school with their bike and get them there, but you could do that with the skateboard. So you can imagine like concentric rings of skatable space out from any elementary school, middle school, high school, and like your parent can get you close enough. And then so you start to reduce the number of cars in and around schools, reduce the number of like, traffic deaths because there are fewer cars in the space and the kids are just like getting themselves into the school. I've got like, ideas for how to make a sidewalk better, just like little stuff, but it's things that would make a difference. But it's, and it's like stuff that you could do it 1 block at a time to see if it works. But the challenge is there's law around it too. Like when you design for bikes, you design for bikes not on the sidewalk and not in the street. There's a bike lane, but a skateboard lives comfortably on the street, in the bike lane, on the sidewalk. There's a sort of like non-linear nature to it, which makes it, a good data gathering tool, but also like challenging from a legal standpoint because people are afraid of having skateboards on the sidewalk, which is silly. Like you make the sidewalk big enough and then it's not a big deal, right? Like but if you have a 6-foot wide sidewalk where there's only so much space, then it becomes challenging. So part of there's a legislative or policy portion of this that involves like making the space more skatable so that the skateboarding is not a danger to people who are not on skateboards.
Cops on skateboards.
Oh man, yeah.
With little lights on the end of their skateboard, and sirens. Bee-boo.
This may be useful, but like you can,
Dismount.
imagine like the curb today ends like here, like you've got a tree or a light post or a mailbox or whatever, and like so there's only so much room outside of that various thing. But if you could extend the sidewalk by another 18 to 24 inches, you could at least have a passing lane outside of that stuff, right? And then from there, if instead of like a sharp curb you had a transition down to the bike lane, you could get in and out of the sidewalk very easily, right? And then if on the other side of the bike lane you also had a bit of a transition, the skateboarder could actually pump back and forth, like they could sort of zigzag down the thing as a way of moving
That's
forward.
cool.
And then you wouldn't need to push. You could actually just pump your way through the space. Bicyclists could do it too, or they could just use it as a sort of a demarcator to know that they needed to stay in there. And you could have the whole thing elevated up from the level of the street. such that like cars were also, it was obvious when a car was doing the wrong thing, right? Like because they would feel their wheels start to creep up there and then it would be a problem for them. I've got other stuff here about what happens when you actually close down the street to traffic, and like build in element like skatable elements and stuff like that would also block cars. But it's like a separate conversation for like when people are actually prepared to consider the idea that streets are not necessarily for cars. But my take on it is that like if you like the bicycle lobby is sort of vilified by people who drive. Like there's sort of like an inherent tension between people who are on bikes and people who drive cars. And maybe a way to sort of like obfuscate that conversation is just to focus on the level of the sidewalk, like widening the sidewalk, making the transition from the sidewalk to the bike lane smoother. Like that would be good for everybody, and it could be sort of an uncontested project that would then ultimately have benefit for the cyclists as well. Because if you said, okay, well, we made it this far, let's just add this on the other side too, and then you got protection for the cyclists also.
Yeah, I feel like I hear a lot. I hear a lot of stuff about like drivers versus cyclists and so on, and we never really talk about like the multimodal commuters. It's like, yeah, I have a truck and I go to IKEA with my truck, but if I have to go to the grocery store, I just jump on my bike and I do that. I've always wanted to put a bumper sticker on my truck that says my other car is a bicycle, just to remind people that like just because I'm driving a truck, I'm not going to try and run you over because you're on a bicycle, because I know what it's like being on a bicycle, and I can respect. And I'm as a driver, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if cyclists have to stop at stop signs. I get it. Like, you're using up way more energy physically than I am in a truck. It's easier for me to stop at a stop sign than it is for you. And if you're going slow enough, then it shouldn't be a problem. So I get this, like this multimodal mentality of like, that should be better encouraged, so that people understand that it's not an us versus them type of situation. But it makes me think of like just the history of streets. Like streets were never designed for cars, right? Like streets were fully pedestrian things, and it wasn't until cars were invented that that they realized pedestrians are getting in the way. And like the history of the jaywalker, that entire campaign is meant to make people feel bad about, because I guess a jay was a bad word that you would call somebody back in the day, and it was meant to embarrass people, shame them into getting off of the street. And that's all just the car lobbyists that did that.
Yeah, this notion of like arrested mobility that has come from like criminalizing jaywalking, among other things, like helmet laws, sidewalk laws. Like there's all kinds of things that disproportionately affect people of color. And like, now that we sort of have cars, like the only way to really exist in public space is in a privately owned vehicle, right? Like, because, if there are no benches on the sidewalk, then you can't sit. Like everything is about encouraging movement, right? It's like maintaining a certain momentum and velocity, and the sidewalks are sort of the only other, like really, other than parks, right? The only other public space we have.
It'd be interesting to partner with like an architecture firm to like imagine, is it, maybe it's not a street so much as it is an architectural community. Because we see this in Toronto. I'm sure this happens everywhere in San Francisco and Oakland. They're like these almost these self-contained kind of communities. They're like their own streets within the city. We had Sidewalk Labs. Google was doing a thing in Toronto for a while, and that would have been a great thing to get them to consider mobility at a more street level. Another thought. Sorry, my brain just goes all kinds of random places. I don't know when to stop or when to not stop. But there's a project that happens here in Toronto called Stopgap, and it's making these wooden wedges to make storefronts accessible. to wheelchairs. And it's not just accessible to wheelchairs, it's very convenient for like UPS and FedEx drivers, because they can just wheel their dollies into your store without having to go over a hump. And also people who walk with canes, they just have to go up and down a ramp. And so Stopgap is an interesting accessibility project, grassroots project. They will take residents in various maker spaces in Toronto, and people will come together and just build all kinds of different sized and different colored wedges. And when you're walking in Toronto downtown and neighborhoods, you'll just see these colorful wedges, and they're all spray painted, stenciled with Stopgap. So I like that idea, and I almost think that like there might be an evolution or a version of that for skateboarding. It's like a stopgap, so that, you know, maybe we can't make the entire curb like cut to get on, but what if there were these wedges or these little curves that were placed at certain areas, and they were a specific color, so that skateboarders could see them from far away and go, oh, I can get up into the sidewalk over there. I can see my entry point. Or, you know, that there's it's every so many meters, there's another one of these things. So you know that if you don't get on this one, you get on the next one. So
Well, I mean,
interesting ideas there.
to that point, like curb cuts do abound in cities. One of the problems is that the lip of the curb cut often doesn't meet the surface of the road.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, like the thing that you're talking about already exists, but the problem is that the actual curb cut does not always meet certain design criteria. So that would be the other, you know, sort of
Got
to,
it. So it's
to
not
Randall's
flush,
point about this, like, you know, when you have an inch high curb, like when the curb cut is still an inch off the ground, it's not a curb cut for anything other than a bicycle or a car.
Mhm.
And even a bicycle hitting it at sort of like at an acute angle is going to struggle with it. So like it has to actually meet I mean, here's an example. Like this is I don't know, you can probably see this, like when
Yeah.
the curb cut just
It's like a
actually
quarter the size of the tire.
yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
it's not actually a curb cut. And so
Yeah.
like, you know, just making like the thing is that you definitely could just have the entire sidewalk be banked. It's just a different form, right? Like in the same way that you use a form to make a right angle curve, you can use a form to make an angled curve. But there's an additional tool that could be developed that like goes and grind, like, you know, that actually you take a grinder and you grind down the surface of any curb cut to meet the surface of the street. And like that would be some kind of like modular grinding device that you could like that a city could basically use and take it down every single block and be like, okay, cool, we're going to adapt all of the existing curb cuts such that we know they're going to be safe. Because I have that issue all the time. I'll be skating in the street and I'll be like, wow, there's a lot of traffic. I would love to get out of the street right now. And I'm like scanning the curb cuts to see if there's one that will actually let me out. And many of them won't. And I'm not, you know, maybe I've got 2 hands full of groceries. Like I'm not in a position to be able to like ollie up the sidewalk, right? And like jump into this other space. Like I need a smooth transition. And just the curb cuts are lacking such that like I'm not able to get out. And then I'm stuck between like parked cars and fast traffic. And, you know, there's nothing I can do.
I gotta bounce, you guys.
Yeah,
gotta
I
get
do
to,
too.
Yeah, same.
the
I gotta
post
eat
office
breakfast.
before.
Julian, I got your package today. I got the things. I got the pins. I got the hat.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sending that over.
I love the stamp. I love the textural quality to the stamped material on it. It's really awesome.
Yeah,
I
that
need-
was a fun one to make. I kind of
Where's my stamp? Where's my stamp?
Oh, you didn't get a stamp?
No,
Damn.
no stamp.
I took liberties with the brand guidelines and went sans serif. I feel Dre, you and I were talking about this. It
Yeah.
might be time to kind of talk and
Mix it up.
maybe commission someone to rebrand.
Yeah,
But I like it. I like getting these things.
yeah, those
Chunk,
things.
chunk.
I have one for my company too.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great for the checks. I get the bank to make temporary checks, so I have nothing written on it, so I can just stamp them out real fast.
Yeah. Good
It's
stuff.
awesome. All
Hey,
man,
Aaron,
I'm out.
thanks for joining, man.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Aaron. This was such a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you
Really,
guys-
really interesting.
really excited about this. If you want to have like a wheeled access section of the Discord, I will definitely hang out there.
Yeah,
Dre created one.
Yeah, it's called Trip City.
Okay, sweet.
It's in the
It's,
front. Look in the front deck area. There's a little skateboard as an icon.
Okay, cool. I'll
That's
hang out
awesome.
there. and you can find me there. But yeah, Dre, if you're in Toronto, I've got some people I would love to link you up with. If you have access to sensors and stuff like that, like I
Yeah.
definitely know people who could come and chill with you and talk.
That's
about it.
awesome. All right, let's do that.
Good
Cool.
stuff.
Cool.
All right,
Yeah.
everyone, have a fantastic. I'm
Awesome.
glad to wrap up the this year with you all. I think this. is
Yeah,
great.
that's right. It's a wrap, isn't it?
Yeah. I'll see you in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Next
Be
week.
well, thank you.
All right. Yeah. Next week in the future.
Awesome.
See ya.
You guys.
Deal.